TWSB, Chapter 21. Why are you coming out of there? The day of the spring ball. Thinking about it now is kind of late, but I have been too complacent. The imperial tailors barged into Juliet Palace at 9 a.m. and put a ton of pins into perfectly good clothes to start their cutthroat fitting process. I felt as if I was watching less than Project Runway greater than happen in front of my eyes. I wasn't even going to the ball. The phrase about a person's face being wings is probably used for a situation like this. I could only awkwardly smile, as I couldn't tell whether the attendant's vocal cords made a typo or if he was complimenting me. The other attendants who helped to dress me covered their mouths and chuckled as well. Oh well, as long as someone here is happy. Prince Jesse, could you please stretch your arms out to your sides? I stretched my arms out at the request of the boss of the changing room. I mean, the imperial tailor. It was my first time wearing a bishop's uniform. Prince Jesse might have worn it before I transmigrated into his body, but this was the first time for me. All of the details are there and thankfully everything fits, despite us feeling a bit rushed to make it. And as our friend over here just said, you truly seem to make the clothes look even better, Your Highness. The boss pushed up her thin-framed glasses before opening up a thick book of formal Church of the Almighty God outfits to show me. There weren't many embroidered aspects of a bishop's outfit, but it was quite splendid because everything was gold in color. Basically, only the underclothes were white. If you look at the next page and the page after that, purple is reserved only for the Pope. I see. I knew about this too. But since Your Highness already has amethysts, there is no greater symbol. It is amazing. It took me about 3 seconds to realize what she meant by that. She meant that my eyes went well with the gold clothes because they were purple, which meant that they received the blessing of the Almighty God. The boss then pretended to cry, saying that it was so hard to procure gold satin of the highest quality during this season. She seemed extremely friendly, despite this being our first meeting. Knock knock. Come in. That was why I responded to the knocking quicker than anybody else. I might lose all of my energy even before going to receive confessions if I stay here listening to this person. Your Highness, it is time for your departure. Benjamin was the one who came to save me. The boss said that this was really the last thing and put a giant mitre on top of my head. The mitre was the opposite of the clothes, with a white background and gold decorations. Although you are probably well aware of this fact, please let me remind you that the priest's formal attire comes with spells imbued in them. The clothes will not feel heavy and you will feel neither hot nor cold. They can also absorb the impact of the carriage traveling over a bumpy road. This mitre will also not fall off your head until you personally take it off. Wow, I didn't know about that. I felt extremely relieved, as I didn't know how I was supposed to wear such thick clothes in the middle of April. Unfortunately, there is nothing I can do about the discomfort from the clothes themselves. Please let it go and just pretend that you have become the best clothes hanger in the world. She sternly said that. I felt a bit sad that although I started this morning as a person, I was pretty much an inanimate object from here on. I had proclaimed that I would not attend the spring ball and would instead focus on my responsibilities as a confessional priest. The Empress and the Cardinal accepted my request. That was why I thought that everything had gone well. I thought that I could enjoy some peace on my own while the imperial family and the nobles were having fun. However, I guess I thought too light of the situation. Your Highness, Ghana looked toward me with pity. They washed me so much this morning that the scent of my shampoo was all around the shaking carriage. Benjamin blamed himself, saying that it is my fault for not informing you about it, but looking back on everything, it was normal for things to end up like this. Although many nobles would arrive at the palace in the evening to match the start of the ball, there were a ton of nobles who decided to show up early to enjoy the flowers at the imperial palace and confess to the Prince of the Holy Kingdom. The Empress had expected all this and sent the tailors to me this morning to make sure that I looked presentable. People in power truly think differently from everybody else. I was just busy debating what to have for lunch today. We will arrive at the temple soon, Your Highness. But I can't see the temple today. I anxiously responded. I would normally be able to see the temple doors at this distance, but there were so many carriages lined up that I could barely see the top of the building. The gridlock was quite serious. There's even a punk who parked horizontally. I could hear Gonal trying his best to hold back his laughter after hearing my mumbling. The coachman helped me off the carriage and the knights guarding the temple saluted me one by one. The heavy main entrance of the temple was opened. I quietly took a deep breath. The 100+ pairs of eyes inside the temple all turned toward me at the same time. Asterisk, wouldn't it have been better to go to the ball? No, absolutely not. Snap out of it. I slowly raised my hand and gave myself a slap. No matter how tired I was, it was better than being at the same place as Christelle and the Imperial Prince. Suffering for a day would allow me to avoid both of them, so I couldn't have such weak thoughts because it was a bit difficult. Are you okay, Your Highness? I will make it so that you can take a bath as soon as we return to the palace. You worked hard, Your Highness. Please rest well when we get back. Both of you worked hard too. Gonal and Benjamin pretty much dragged me out of the temple. It was actually my mind that was extremely tired, not my body. I had a migraine even though I spent more time listening than speaking and even took 2 breaks to eat. It must be stress since I didn't even use a lot of ether. Gonal, what time is it right now? It is 8:35 p.m. Thanks. The promised time to meet Lady Sarnez in the Strouder Palace, which was next to the temple, was 9 p.m. I thought that I wouldn't even meet her as a coincidence if I returned to my room around 8:30 p.m. and I was relieved that things were going as planned. Next time, I really should just use being sick as an excuse. Yes, Your Highness, that is probably for the best. Benjamin agreed with me. I chuckled and started walking toward the carriage. My body was stiff because I had been tense all day, wearing these clothes I was not used to wearing. The confessions of the nobles were not that different from the confessions of the laborers at the Imperial Palace. The only differences were that the penitents were wearing fancier clothes and used more stylish words. Other than having people staring right into my eyes and the fact that they seemed to be confessing about the same things, the flow itself was pretty similar. There was someone near the end who asked me to help them come up with a name. The 2 of their eyes opened wide. He wanted me to give a middle name for his daughter. He didn't have anything to confess but said that he came today just so he could have me give his daughter a middle name. Gonal shook his head side to side. Benjamin just sighed. Apparently the 4-year-old girl, Sophie, really liked kicking balls around, so I gifted her the middle name of Zinedine, so that she can grow up to be great at it. I thought it was a great choice since the people of the Empire use French names. I will escort you to Juliet Palace, Your Highness. The Imperial coachman approached and opened the carriage door for me. I nodded my head and stepped onto the step. No, I was about to do so. Benjamin, that, I pointed at something. I wondered if I was seeing things because I was so tired. It was because something was happening across the street that seemed unbelievable. Benjamin's eyes opened wide after his gaze followed my finger. Gonal seemed shocked as well. The esteemed divine beast. The young boy blankly mumbled those words. There were thick vines growing up from the ground toward the leftmost balcony of Strouder Palace. They looked as thick as the waist of adult men. I could hear the noise of the vines growing through the grass and shrubs from across the street. Quote. Okay, this isn't a hallucination. It is real. I got onto the carriage without any hesitation. There were red torches and magic lights around Strouder Palace since the ball was taking place, but I could pretend that I didn't see anything since the area around the temple was dark. It was not my business whether that red panda couldn't leave the Imperial Palace or if this was a new divine beast that appeared. Shall we go? Yes, Your Highness. Everybody quickly started moving after hearing my cold voice. Gonal and Benjamin sat down and the coachman quickly moved over to close the carriage door. It was at that moment. Prue, we all heard the pained cry of the red panda. I clenched my eyes shut. I spent all day suffering while listening to the confessions of the nobles. I worked my butt off all day and barely got out so that I could avoid going to that palace. If the author had even the smallest amount of conscience, they can't do this to me right now. Screech, it wasn't my business whether the little punk had been starving or was in pain. The imperial family and the nobles inside will take care of it. They won't kill it since it is a divine beast and would probably put it in a cage and treat it as a spectacle for a bit before sending it off to a nice place. Let's go. Screech, screech, screech. I jumped up from my seat. If this was a web novel with me as the main character, I would probably comment right away that the pace is extremely slow. I'm outta here. Unfortunately, the real me was getting off the carriage. Damn it. Asterisk screech. Yes, it is your big bro. It's been a while, hasn't it? The vines had reached out and were wrapped around the ledge of the balcony now. I used the thick vines as steps and easily got to the incident site. I only came here because this was the leftmost balcony of Strouder Palace. I would have clenched my teeth and left if it was the rightmost balcony that Lady Sarnez mentioned. Will His Highness be okay? Divine beasts are not regular animals. They cannot be tamed by anyone without ether. You all just quietly go inform Her Eminence about this. Hurry. Benjamin was having a serious conversation with the guards of Strouder Palace down below. The soldiers seemed anxious as there was no manual for when a divine beast shows up in the garden. They would never have let me climb up if I didn't tell them that a priest's formal attire can absorb the impact of a moving carriage. Big bro has no food right now. Will you still come with me? I reached my land through the railing. Thankfully, this red panda was the one I had looked after before. I remembered it because one of the stripes on his chubby tail was white. The red panda looked at me and tilted its head in confusion. I could hear beautiful music and the muffled noise of people talking through the half-open balcony door. Screech. Good. Come this way. Let's just spend the night together with this big bro. I planned on going to look for Cardinal Boutier with this guy first thing in the morning when I wake up. Then she would take care of everything. I reached my arm out and released my holy domain. The red panda felt the flow of golden ether and twitched its whiskers before rubbing the tip of its round nose on my palm. I finally laughed in relief. It should be good now. Click. I suddenly saw the tip of black dress shoes through my peripheral vision while my focus was still on the red panda. I slowly raised my head. I made eye contact with an unfamiliar man. But I had no choice but to recognize him. What are you doing over here? His low voice that sounded familiar oddly made me recall a conversation I once had with Yuns. It sounded extremely fresh, as if I was hearing it through headphones. Young Yuns, why do you always talk about the male lead when you hate him so much? Are you sure you don't actually like him? I don't, it's because of his damn face. Face. My sister's face at that time resembled Ms. Na Moon-hee shouting, "Pumpkin sweet potato." Reference to a Korean drama. Here's the YouTube video of the scene in the look is around the 1-minute mark. Web links. Yuns always talked highly of QNW's male lead but always maintained a cynical attitude toward him. He had the face of a god who belongs in the Louvre, but his personality is shit. I could experience what she was talking about face to face right now. The man slightly frowned after looking back and forth at the red panda and me. I guess the divine beast woke up. The way his face seemed to blend classical and modern beauty so flawlessly made it seem as if he belonged in the Orsay rather than the Louvre. His hair that was as black as the abyss and his eyes that looked as if garnets had been placed in there was overpowering the area. This was the second person I had to avoid at all costs. The male lead of less than I quit my job and ended up as a noble young lady in another world greater than. This was Cedric Ryester. TWSB. Chapter 22. Handling 1. That was the moment I thoroughly understood why I was the second male lead while the Imperial Prince was the main male lead. There was a time when Gonal told me something embarrassing and said that 10 out of 10 people would turn around to look at me if I walked past them. As for Imperial Prince Cedric, people would not only turn around to look at him, they would drop whatever they were doing and chase after him because he was so handsome. Even looking at him from down here, I could tell that he was at least 10 centimeters taller than me. This was quite the difference in specs. I tried my best to snap my mind out of this funk. The Imperial Prince and I looked at each other for a while. I had at least had the broken wooden window between us when I met Christelle. Although I couldn't keep a poker face, it had been easy to hide my expressions because of the dark confessional. The fact that Christelle rushed in and out was advantageous for me as well. They were all great conditions for me to hide my shock and embarrassment. But I was facing this guy face to face. We were also on a balcony with red torches and magic lights shining brightly from the garden below. I was almost resentful to the damn Imperial Prince for choosing this particular balcony out of all the balconies in Strouder Palace to get some air. Yes, Your Royal Highness, I will take this little guy with me. Her Eminence, Cardinal Boutier, will be informed of it as well. I put on as natural of a smile as possible and opened my mouth. We didn't exchange greetings or whatever even though this was our first time meeting. I had no regrets about this, as I was hoping that this would be our first and last meeting. I reached my arms out to the red panda. The Imperial Prince, who was looking down at me and the little guy, started speaking. I heard that you were not going to attend the ball. I am not. I just happened to see this baby red panda here while passing by, Your Royal Highness. Anybody would be able to tell that there were vines that resembled Jack's beanstalk, so why the heck was he mentioning the ball? I also didn't like how the Imperial Prince was speaking informally to me during our first meeting. While all of that was going on, the red panda wasn't listening to me either. The little punk seemed to be curious about the newly arrived individual, as it stopped heading toward me and walked over to the Imperial Prince's side instead. The Imperial Prince was smirking, as if he found this to be amusing, instead of helping me when he could clearly see that I was working hard to lead the divine beast to me. He truly lived up to his infamy. Why did such a stupid obstacle have to appear when I don't have any crackers up my sleeves? I really wanted to go and get some rest, so I held back a sigh and released my ether. My holy domain appeared and the area under my feet became brighter. Demi. I then whispered the little guy's name. The noble that asked me to name his daughter earlier today told me something. They say that if you call them by a great name, they will respond with a great heart. It made sense. I've never heard about it in Korea, but I decided I would use it if the Empire had such a saying. I based it on the name Demeter since he is an earth attribute divine beast. He is a divine beast, so it is partially Demi, a god, even though this little guy may leave tomorrow. I thought that this guy might respond well and come to me if I gave him the best name I could think of right now. Screech. The red panda screeched louder than ever before because of my divine oracle. To be more specific, it was a noise in between pee and screech. The way he was opening and closing its mouth while looking at me again made me feel really good, because it looked like he was smiling at me. The little punk started trotting over to me as if he was never led astray in the first place. He then jumped right over the ledge and crawled up my arm, making me smile. Let's go now, Demi. The little punk pushed down on my neck with his hind legs and stood up. I carefully held Demi's black front paws as he tried to get on my back. What is the meaning of this? The Imperial Prince asked that question. He keeps talking informally. This bastard must have been taught wrong when he was younger. What do you mean by that, Your Royal Highness? Name. I'm sure he's not suddenly curious about my name, so he must be asking about Demi. He's similar in color to Demi glass sauce. I couldn't mention Demeter in a world without Greek mythology, and I didn't want to suddenly talk about prefixes when I still didn't know a lot about how language worked in this world. After I said whatever came to my mind, Imperial Prince Cedric scoffed. You really seem to like food. I eat very well. I will be on my way now, Your Royal Highness. There was no need to chat any longer. My work here was done since I procured the red panda, Demi. I confirmed that Demi was safely on my shoulder and slowly started to mow. Hold on. How does he know that I like food? I suddenly got the chills. I mentioned the color of Demi glass sauce, but I never said that I picked the name because I like that sauce. It made me feel odd. I knew that I was being overly sensitive, but it nagged at me that he immediately figured out that I was a glutton. I slowly moved my eyes from looking at the vines for a place to step to the Imperial Prince. The young man was still looking at me. Did you need anything else? The clouds parted at that moment. The bright light of the moon shined down on his silhouette. I could clearly see his bright orange irises as they reflected the light. The way his satin-like black hair was slightly curly seemed quite familiar as well. No way, dang, I flinched and looked down. I could see Benjamin lifting 9 fingers to me. The bell was ringing because it was 9 p.m. Never mind. I will be on my way now, Your Royal Highness. I rapidly blurted those words out and took a step down the vine. It seemed too personal of an issue for me to say my hypothesis out loud. My mind was quite chaotic with all sorts of thoughts. The Imperial Prince just slightly tilted his head without showing any other reaction. Screech click. I heard the balcony door open and close at that moment. I could hear the voices of the guests and the waltz music for a moment before they disappeared again. I then heard someone's gentle voice. I ignored everything and carefully took another step down, so that Demi would not shake. Your loyal subject greets our esteemed Royal Highness. Lady Sarnez. What did he say? Squee. Sorry. I made a mistake. Demi screeched at me for missing a step. I anxiously held onto the vine in front of me. Why is that person here? Madam, I saw that young Lady Sarnez has yet to arrive. Yes, Your Royal Highness, I was informed that she was going to change as she found her clothes to be uncomfortable. Lady Sarnez's voice was shaking. The Imperial Prince was speaking respectfully to her, but the coldness in his voice made him seem more like a loan shark than her future son-in-law. Demi wagged his tail in front of my face. I rebooted my body that had stopped for a moment out of shock. Thankfully, the two of them were not visible to me right now. I greet your highness, Prince Jesse Venetian as well. Lady Isabel de Sarnez suddenly spoke to me as well. I had not expected the two of you to be together. I thought that she should only be able to see the top of my head, but then I remembered that I had a tall mitre on my head right now. I felt like a pheasant. It was made so that I couldn't feel the weight or heat from it, but I felt more like a damn pheasant than a person right now. Hello, madam. I barely managed to speak. I wanted to tell her that she got the wrong person, but I could not do that. I was wearing fancy formal attire and had purple eyes. I had no choice but to charge forward. First of all, I want to thank you very much. Lady Sarnez then walked toward the ledge. I raised my head as a shadow appeared over me to find a much younger face than I expected. Her face, that made her seem at most in her mid-30s, seemed to be full of guilt and fear. I know that your time is very precious. I understand how disrespectful it was of me to make such an appointment as I pleased. That is why I can only thank you for your kindness to still show up. I'm sorry, Lady Sarnez. Unfortunately, I did not come here to meet with you. Excuse me. A teardrop brushed past my cheek. I clenched my teeth. I came here to rescue a divine beast. This little guy over here. I would have gone to the farthest balcony on the right if I was headed to see you, Lady Sarnez. She blinked her eyes. She did not seem to understand what I was saying. Your Highness, this is the farthest balcony on the right, this is the farthest left. I sharply cut her off. The Imperial Prince, who was quietly listening in the back, snorted and, it is on the left if you look at it from the back. That was what he said. The red panda Demi's fancy special ability, using thick vines to create stairs for humans, was put on full display. The wish that he would have used such an ability earlier was, sadly, too late. With the little punk around my neck, I put on the calmest expression possible, and stepped into the balcony. I would lose if I showed them that I was embarrassed. I could feel the obvious ridicule from Imperial Prince Cedric's gaze, but I pretended not to notice it. Thankfully, Lady Sarnez did not ask if I was terrible with directions. Then shall we get started? Your confession. I hoped that the progression would be dramatic but smooth since I was in a novel. Even if I fail, maybe I could fail at a good spot to make myself look cooler than I do currently. I wanted the type of scenario where the reader can't help but wonder about the character's growth as they scroll down. I didn't want it to focus on my accidentally showing up at the meeting location because I couldn't tell the difference between the building's front and back door. Now it made sense why there were no carriages in front of Strouder Palace. There was no need to park in the back since all guests would go in through the front. It was increasingly unbelievable the more I thought about it. Didn't you say that you came here for the divine beast? Can you please stop talking? You're making me furious. The Imperial Prince did not even blink at my glare. I suppressed the embarrassment boiling inside me again and turned my head toward Lady Sarnez. She seemed concerned that someone might open and enter through the balcony door, but looked a bit better after hearing that I would take her confession. Thank you very much, Your Highness. I would have had nothing to say if you chose to leave. It's fine, this is to preserve the last bits of my dignity. I almost blurted those words out loud, but they quickly disappeared from my mind. I thought that saying something like, I made a mistake with front back, and left right, but I am still leaving, seemed even stupider. The image of acting cool and taking her confession seemed like the better option in the current situation. I was curious to know what she had to say about the divine item that disappeared from the Temple of Vigilance, as well. Now then, could our Imperial Prince please exit the balcony? Confessions are done one-on-one in order to maintain confidentiality. The Imperial Prince's eyebrow twitched after hearing my statement, in which I purposely did not address him as, Your Royal Highness. The response I got back was unexpected. I'm pretty sure you'll need me. He then raised his left hand, which had a black glove on it. He made a horizontal gesture in the air and the balcony door clicked and locked. Lady Sarnez seemed calm but I couldn't help but be astonished. What just? I guess you haven't heard that I am a magic swordsman. I had not. However, I clearly remembered Yunce calling this bastard a sword master. I swear that I didn't get this confused with a setting from a different novel. I thought that she was right since he just swung his sword around all the time, but a magic swordsman. Furthermore, the magic did not seem to be the type of magic I imagined in my head. Is this less than X-Men greater than or something? Is he some kind of mutant? Your Highness, it is fine with me. I will take it as a blessing from the Almighty God that I can even confess to you. In addition, Lady Sarnez seemed to be stuck in the middle of this standoff that wasn't really a standoff between the Imperial Prince and me. Her voice was still shaking, but her black eyes seemed firm. His Royal Highness has every right to know of my sin. TWSB. Chapter 23. Handling 2. Why don't we sit down and chat? I guided Lady Sarnez to the flowers and the vine steps that Demi had made. It wasn't completely clean since I stepped on them to walk down, but there wasn't anywhere else to sit on the balcony. Thankfully, Lady Sarnez did not seem to care about that. I just left that damn punk of an Imperial Prince alone to do whatever he wants. My last confession was 2 months ago. Lady Sarnez cleared her throat before speaking. I quietly nodded my head and released my circle. Now, please share what you are feeling guilty about. My voice echoed through the night air. I could feel a small amount of ether leaving my body. The holy domain created a geometric shape as it circled around the 3 people and 1 divine beast. Lady Sarnez seemed to blank out for a moment after seeing the golden glow. Demi detected the ether and slid down from my shoulder onto my lap. I quietly waited for her to start her confession. I planned to gather as much information as possible and then return to Juliet Palace. Simon, my husband, loved his daughter dearly. I loved her just as much. Her gaze made it seem as if she was thinking about a moment in the past. I thought I could see a small smile appearing on her face as she thought about Christelle. I realized something the day I became a part of the Sarnez Lord's castle after marrying my husband. That child was more like me than I had expected. Although we do not share a single drop of blood, Christelle and I were very similar. We are both quiet, extremely shy, and very bad at expressing ourselves. I nodded my head at her. The original Christelle was said to be that kind of person. It was lonely living as the wife of a duke in that large lord's castle. Simon is a good husband, but he was too busy. I married him knowing that, but it was still very hard. That child being there made everything okay. Lady Sarnez smiled brightly. She quickly wiped a falling tear with her handkerchief. I could see her pale face gain a bit of life now that she was speaking about her daughter. That was when Christelle was 8 and I was 22. I barely stopped myself from frowning. I knew that 18 was considered an adult in this world, but it felt too young for a Korean person like me. I couldn't even fathom the amount of pressure she must have felt, becoming the lady of a house at the Korean age of 23. TL. Korean age starts at 1 at birth, so it is generally older than, for example, the US age system. Every moment I spent with that child was happy. I didn't leave the Lord's castle very much, and that led to a lot of people pointing fingers at me, but having picnics with just the 2 of us, creating small concerts, cooking together, those moments we had, they were all so great that I felt as if I had received a present. I thought to myself that Christelle was a wonderful wedding gift. Lady Sarnez wiped away her tears. Gonal had mentioned 2 rumors he had heard about her. One of them was that she was the typical stepmother. But this expression was something that a person could not have unless they truly cherished and loved someone. Either that or she deserves an Oscar for her acting. Didn't you say that you are going to confess? A cold, low voice interrupted us at that moment. The Imperial Prince, who was leaning against the ledge with his long legs crossed, was glaring at Lady Sarnez and me. I don't really care for soap operas, madam. Your Royal Highness. Your Highness, it is okay. His Royal Highness is right. I was about to sharply rebuke this bastard of an Imperial Prince for interrupting someone else's confession, but Lady Sarnez stopped me. My introduction was quite long. The incident happened after Christelle went into a coma. She was speaking in a choppy manner. Her Majesty, with her unending grace, sent the Imperial doctor to our place. My husband brought famous doctors from all around the empire for 3 years to examine Christelle. However, nobody could recognize the ailment or even have a clue about it. They could not get our child to open her eyes. One of the doctors said that she might be like this forever, that she might sleep for the rest of her life. Is that why you took and used the blessing of the blue sea? Imperial Prince Cedric sharply asked. It seemed as if he threw away all his manners, but he confirmed that he knew about the Sarnez divine item disappearing as I had expected. After hearing that it could not be healed with medicine, magic, or a priest's healing powers, I thought that I should go make a wish at the Temple of Vigilance. Are you stating that you have stolen the divine item that was at the border? I asked in shock, but she shook her head. I thought about the legend about how the Almighty God would grant your wish if you made a wish of blood at the divine item within the Temple of Vigilance. I told my husband that I wanted to go there, and he came back with quite a bit of demonic beast blood. He said that he would not stop killing demonic beasts until his daughter was saved. He probably had no other choice as a parent. They were so desperate that they chose to believe a legend that could only be found in holy text. They didn't care that other people might gossip about them going crazy. But we heard about the theft before we could start our journey toward the temple. We heard that the divine item was missing and that nobody would be able to go inside for a while. Lady Sarnez's statement was stopped short by her tears. Demi quietly groaned, as if he was feeling sorry for her. I gently rubbed his back. I despaired as if the world was coming to an end. Our plan had to be stopped before we could even try. The next day, my husband asked me something. He asked if it would be better for us to let her go. Imperial Prince Cedric quietly sighed. If I understood correctly, Duke Sarnez asked her if they should euthanize their daughter. I asked him for a day to think about it. I then stayed by her side all day. That was when I thought about the blessing of the blue sea. If we couldn't go to the Temple of Vigilance, I thought that I could at least pray to our family's divine item. I did it thinking that it would really be my last resort. My eyes opened wide. The Imperial Prince frowned. Then, are you saying that you made a wish to the blessing of the blue sea? My husband does not know about it, Your Highness. I did it alone. She quickly added on. I secretly switched the divine item with a sapphire I received as a wedding gift. I had just planned on putting it by my child's side and praying. It was going to be for just a moment. But then, her pupils started shaking uncontrollably. A blue light shot out of the divine item and fell onto my daughter. I thought the Almighty God really was listening to my wish. It truly seemed like a miracle. I hugged Christelle with joy when she woke. But then, I realized that I could not see the blessing of the blue sea anymore. And then, I quickly organized my thoughts. The blessing of the blue sea, the item that should have been a wedding gift for the Imperial Prince and Christelle's wedding. An item that was probably a MacGuffin in QNW, that had disappeared in the beginning. TL. In fiction, a MacGuffin, sometimes MacGuffin, is an object, device, or event that is necessary to the plot and the motivation of the characters, but insignificant, unimportant, or irrelevant in itself. It was because Lady Sarnez prayed for her daughter to be saved. It seemed like a scene out of an old Disney movie, but from the author's point of view because Christelle was the main character and therefore had to wake up. Even if the author didn't want to do it, the handle had to be turned a bit to increase the probability of her waking up. My daughter did not recognize me. That was to be expected. She was Christelle, but not Christelle. However, Lady Sarnez did not know this. At first, I thought that it was because she was still sick. My daughter, who does not have her memories, who does not seem to know a lot of things she used to know. My husband thinks that our daughter has become more mature, but I have a different thought. Lady Sarnez's lips were shaking. It sounded as if Christelle had a hard time adjusting after transmigrating into this body. It made sense since I already knew that this was a novel, but she just suddenly fell into a different world. What if, because I made such a difficult wish to the divine item, what if Christelle is being cursed because I could not understand the Almighty God's will and was greedy? Are you seriously asking that question? Imperial Prince Cedric responded before I could do so. The Almighty God's curse is not a joke. If you are thinking about using that word as a shield to lessen your burden. Your Royal Highness, please wait. I stopped him. The Imperial Prince seemed disgruntled but did not say anything else. Lady Sarnez, why do you feel that way? It is possible that the young lady is showing such symptoms because she had been sick for so long. No, my daughter is now able to control a scary ability. Water. She can control water with her fingertips. A large drop of water moved according to her will right in front of my eyes. I guess this part is finally being discussed. The Imperial Prince and I made eye contact. I could see many emotions quickly floating through his orange eyes. I told her the following. I told her that I committed a grave sin to save her and that although I should have been the one to be punished, she received it instead. Christelle then responded like this. She kind of scoffed in disbelief. Someone who was pretty much dead had come back to life. She told me to stop crying because it was not a curse. She said that she would personally pay the price to the imperial family if it really was a sin that she absorbed the divine item that should have been given to the imperial family. It was a very bold and understanding response as expected of the main character who Yuns liked. Lady Sarnez then started crying. She buried her face in her handkerchief. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Many people were harmed because of my extreme greed. Christelle, my husband, and even His Royal Highness. I heard that His Royal Highness really needed that wedding gift, but I still. The Imperial Prince had a stoic expression on his face. I couldn't tell whether he was thinking that there was nothing to be done about a past happening, or if he was hiding his anger. I repeated what she said twice in my mind so that I would not forget it. I then took a deep breath. Oh merciful Almighty God, please forgive Lady Sarnez for the lies she has said to me. The balcony was quiet. My holy domain showed no reaction. I then smiled. Everything you said until now was the truth. Thank you very much. Lady Sarnez's lips opened wide in shock. The Imperial Prince scoffed in disbelief. Using a confession as a lie detector. I learned how to do it from Cardinal Boutier. My holy domain would have shown an ether reaction and washed away Lady Sarnez's sin if she had lied, but everything she had said was true. I apologize, but I had to account for the possibility that you were lying. I smiled bitterly. And I do not believe that you have committed a sin, Lady Sarnez. You had no intention of destroying the divine item, and simply prayed for your daughter's well-being. It weighs on me that you did not inform your husband about it, but that is something for the two of you to slowly work out. Lady Sarnez tightly clenched her handkerchief. The Imperial Prince then silently handed her his handkerchief when she went to use her wet handkerchief once again. I was quite shocked, but maintained a poker face as I continued with the sacrament. I do not agree that young Lady Christelle was cursed. The power of water is an authority of the Almighty God and is a holy blessing. They say that holy knights are only born in the Holy Kingdom, however, they also could have received their powers after they were born. The Almighty God could be capricious as well. Lady Sarnez smiled a bit after hearing that. I could feel the Imperial Prince staring at me. Please share the story you shared with me with Her Majesty and Her Eminence. Make sure to talk with your husband and young Lady Christelle as well. This is your penance. My holy domain slowly lost its glow. Please do not worry about your daughter. She will be fine. Lady Sarnez bowed deeply after hearing my final divine oracle. I quickly changed topics because she seemed as if she would start crying again while mumbling about how thankful she was. There was also something else I was curious about. By the way, Lady Sarnez, how is young Lady Christelle? How is she planning on paying the imperial family for it? I took a peek towards the Imperial Prince as I said that. The situation made it feel as if their engagement would be broken, but I was curious to know whether Christelle still had plans to marry this punk. Maybe it would be the type of romance where she offers herself instead of the divine item. It is exactly as you just mentioned, Your Highness. The corners of her lips struggled but slowly tilted upwards. She said that she would proudly become the Empire's first holy knight to pay back her debt to the imperial family. She thought that the weight in my heart might become a bit lighter as well. Wait a minute. Esteemed author Nim, I think you turned the handle a bit too much. TWSB. Chapter 24. Handling 3. I couldn't quickly come up with a response. My mind was busy going through all the clues that Yuns had told me in the past. Unfortunately, the combination of the words, Holy Knight, and Christelle, could not be found no matter how much I thought about it. I talked about Holy Knights earlier because I wanted to mention how Christelle's ability was not something bad, but I didn't expect things to really go like this. I was certain that the beginning of QNW did not go like this even though I had never read it. Breaking off of the engagement and declaring a change in profession, the plot twist became bigger with the disappearance of the blessing of the Blue Sea. It made me wonder what power granted Lady Sarnez her wish in the original story. It would most likely be the divine item that was said to have been stolen from the Temple of Vigilance. If it was still there, Lady Sarnez might have been able to save her daughter while keeping the blessing of the blue sea as a wedding gift. Christelle would also not have gotten the power of water. Then that left just one question. Who stole the divine item from the temple, and why? Then, the moment I started talking, knock, knock, knock knock. I heard a somewhat familiar beat as someone knocked. It was the same beat used when cheering, Day, Han, Mingek. TL. If you want to hear the beat, go to about the 15-second mark in this video https://www. youtube.com/watch?v=t-1kw_wu closing parenthesis. Imperial Prince Cedric was the first to respond. He seemed to know who was knocking as he snorted a sigh before drawing another line in the air with his gloved hand. Click. I heard the door unlocking. This ability seemed just as amazing the second time. The balcony door slowly opened, and a familiar person walked out with a smile on her face. Lady Sarnez and I immediately got up. Oh, it is a gathering of people I like. Cardinal Boutier slowly addressed us. She was wearing the cardinal's formal attire. Both her clothes and her mitre were much fancier than mine. Her clothes had a lot more layers and the embroidery had a lot more detail. She gently waved her hand and the attendants behind her quickly withdrew. Hello, Your Eminence. It is my pleasure to be in your presence, Your Noble Eminence, Madam Cardinal. Your Eminence. I, Lady Sarnez, and the Imperial Prince all greeted her in that order. The Cardinal responded and said that she was happy to see us, before her beige-colored eyes turned to look at Demi, who was on my shoulder. I'm relieved that you tamed him well. I heard about what was going on. Squee. Demi quietly squealed, as if he was responding to her. I then remembered that Benjamin ordered the guards to inform Her Eminence about the situation. I was about to tell her that I would probably have to send the little guy off in the morning when the Cardinal spoke first. Our little prince did a very good job with the confession. You also didn't forget the things I taught you. She was looking at me like a proud teacher. My thoughts paused for a moment before resuming. Did you hear all of that, Your Eminence? The soldiers told me it was urgent, so I even left Frederick behind to show up when I noticed that the balcony door was locked. I ended up hearing it while waiting inside. She then said that she was sorry, though I saw no semblance of regret on her face. It looked like she purposely eavesdropped, but it was hard to suspect her because of the innocent look on her face. She slowly walked over to us and reached her hand out to Lady Sarnez. You're going to get dehydrated if you cry so much, Isabel. Should we go drink some tea? Her voice was as warm as a mother's lullaby. Lady Sarnez's face scrunched upon hearing the Cardinal's suggestion. It reminded me of Yunce when she was young. She would act strong and get up without crying after falling down and scraping her knee. But when I walk over to her and ask, "Are you okay?" she would burst into tears. Wah! Lady Sarnez pressed her face against the Cardinal's shoulder. I could understand how upset she had been with such a heavy burden on her heart. The Cardinal patted Lady Sarnez's head, and led her inside while the Imperial Prince and I quietly stood there. She was headed toward where her partner, the Empress, and Lady Sarnez's partner, the Duke, were waiting for them. Oh right, Cedric. The Cardinal stopped to look back as she was heading out the door. The Imperial Prince waited for her to speak. I heard that young Lady Sarnez's carriage has arrived. Shouldn't you go out there? We probably have to cancel the engagement announcement that was planned, but you are that child's partner today. She didn't even wait for the Imperial Prince's response as she smiled and started walking again. She really was kind of a do-whatever-I-want type of person, but she had an odd way of making it hard to go against her. This must be what they call charisma or something. The Imperial Prince did not respond. He was almost glaring at the Cardinal as she walked away, but his thoughts seemed to be elsewhere. The fatigue and chaos I had momentarily forgotten about instantly flooded back after seeing the serious expression on his face. Goodbye then, Your Royal Highness. I also gave a short farewell before slowly grabbing Demi, who was tickling my neck with his movements. It was time to head back. Did you mean what you said earlier? A suave low voice spoke to me from behind. I turned around to see the Imperial Prince looking down at me. I guess he's just a punk who likes to keep things short and say whatever he wants without going into much detail. What are you talking about, Your Royal Highness? His orange eyes glared at me. The part about how it is not a curse. Young Lady Christelle de Sarnez is now entering the hall. A loud voice echoed out from the hall and drowned the Imperial Prince's voice. The loud hall instantly fell quiet as if doused in cold water. The endless music abruptly ended as well. I got the chills for a moment. The main character's beau monde debut was unique, starting immediately with her entrance. I couldn't hold back my curiosity and walked toward the balcony door. Although I wanted to avoid the two main characters, I also wanted to see the character Yuns loved so much when she was under bright lights. I needed to get a good impression of her in order to tell Yuns about how Christelle was in person. Are you interested? Nope, I am just going to look, Your Royal Highness. I peeked my head out the door. Thankfully, nobody seemed to be interested in me at all. The luxuriously dressed nobles were all focused on one spot while holding either transparent wine glasses or their partner's hand. They were all looking at the grand staircase descending from the second floor to the center of the hall. There was a beauty walking down the red carpeted stairs without an escort. Her pink hair that was tied up was waving while her blue-gray eyes were shining like jade marbles as they reflected the light of the chandelier. Her white jacket, which had beautiful embroidery done in blue threads, slightly shook as she moved. Her silver boots and dark blue formal attire underneath sharply contrasted the jacket. Her expression showed a hint of anxiety hidden behind confidence. It made her look like a company employee who was about to give a presentation she was proud of. Actually, she sort of looked like an employee who had written their letter of resignation. She was different. She was completely different from the Christelle on the QNW cover art. The girl who had her long hair down and was wearing a fancy pastel-colored dress. This Christelle looked more like a young knight. Click, click, click. Her boots clacked as she walked through the marble floor. The crowd of nobles parted to the side in order to open up a path for her as if she was some kind of prophet. Christelle's destination, which she arrived at without any hesitation, was in front of the Empress and the Cardinal. The Sarnez couple was standing next to them. Hold on, Demi. I'll play with you in the carriage later. The mumblings from the nobles grew louder, but I couldn't see anything because Demi was dangling his tail in front of my eyes. Christelle must have done something. Excuse me. Imperial Prince Cedric walked past me and out of the balcony. He used the fact that he was taller than most people to accurately find the shortest route to his mother and godmother. While he did that, I took off my mitre and placed Demi inside. He seemed satisfied as he created a small azalea at the tip of his ear. Oh, the nobles blocking my view gasped in amazement. I stuck my neck out to see what was going on. Christelle was kneeling on one knee in front of the Empress and the Cardinal as if she was giving a vow of loyalty while Imperial Prince was offering her his hand and saying something. I couldn't hear what he was saying because they were too far away, but the mood didn't seem bad. Musical note, musical note, musical note. Christelle grabbed the Imperial Prince's hand and stood up as the waltz music restarted. The nobles clapped and cheered. They seemed to have been wowed by something, as some of them were crying and calling out to the Almighty God. Woo! What a cool-looking pair. The nobles around me were commenting in awe. Imperial Prince Cedric and Christelle were dancing. Anybody would have been able to tell that she was not familiar with this, but the Imperial Prince must be good at leading as there were no major mistakes. His black uniform, which was decorated with golden threads on the sleeves, matched quite well with Christelle's outfit. I guess they really do get connected. Squee. I patted Demi's nose as he tilted his head in confusion. I felt a bit relieved. I had no idea what Christelle said while kneeling nor what the Imperial Prince said to her, but the important thing was that there was no greater green light than the two main characters holding hands and dancing together on their first meeting. This is great. Let's go for real now. I raised my head after saying that, just for Christelle and I to make eye contact. No, I must not have seen correctly. She is far away and there are a lot of people here. She could have been looking at another noble and we coincidentally brushed glances as she did that. I told myself that and took a step back. Christelle and the Imperial Prince made another 1.5 turns before the Imperial Prince looked right at me this time. I flinched and closed the balcony door after walking inside. The last thing I saw through the gap in the door was Christelle looking directly at me after the pair made another half turn. Why is this playing out like a horror movie? I had the chills. I felt as if the author turned the handle until it fell off, then flew over and stabbed me in the chest. Your Highness, that was too much. What do we do? Benjamin Nim, you worked really hard as well. It's fine, you worked hard too. The person who greeted me when I tiredly walked onto the carriage was Gonal, who seemed even more tired than me. Benjamin, who had been waiting for me in the garden the whole time, seemed quite tired as well. Gonal took out some lemon balm tea, a few eclairs, and a basket of snacks. Knock knock. Someone knocked on the carriage door as I was peeling a hard-boiled egg for Demi. Gonal answered and the door opened. The person standing outside was not the coachman. Lady Sarnez. Prince Jessie. Her eyes were redder than when I had seen her on the balcony, but she looked much better as she stood there alone. Benjamin and Gonal showed her as much respect as they could while remaining seated. I offered her a seat in shock, but she just quietly chuckled and shook her head. I just came because there was something I was unable to tell you regarding the divine item that disappeared from the Temple of Vigilance. She then cautiously looked at Benjamin and Gonal. She was quietly asking if it was okay for the two of them to hear. I will hear it together with them. Please tell me. Christelle did tell me at the confessional that she would talk about this, but I thought that she had told me everything during her confession. I was confused, but waited for her to speak. I am unsure of the validity. It was something my husband and I heard while researching rumors about the divine item. We heard it from our connection in the Holy Kingdom. The high-ranking priests of the Holy Kingdom seemed to believe that the divine item had fulfilled its duty, rather than disappeared. When you say it fulfilled its duty, someone might have made a wish there and caused the divine item to be permanently damaged rather than gone. She fixed her shawl. It looked as if she hastily put it on to come here. I heard that while Her Eminence, Cardinal Boutier, has cleared your name as the representative of the Empire, the priests of the Holy Kingdom believe you are innocent for that reason. Because of that, my extremely tired brain started to move again. Maybe the blessing of the Blue Sea had disappeared after fulfilling someone's wish instead of being stolen. Thanks to that, the backstory and setting of the novel has been completely twisted. I wished to tell you because I thought that it would be good for you to know as well, Your Highness. She finished speaking in a quiet voice. I saw a brightly shining thread of potential from within the hundreds of thin and weak threads surrounding it. TWSB. Chapter 25. Curriculum for Pride and Prejudice 1. I think I slept for about 10 hours. Christelle, the main character, proclaimed that she would get a new occupation while Imperial Prince Cedric looked a lot like someone else I know. Then, there was the mystery about the divine item from the temple. I wondered if I would be able to sleep because I had so much to think about, but I passed out as soon as I washed up and laid down on the bed. It was 9 a.m. when I opened my eyes. Chirp, chirp, it's nice and peaceful. I agreed with Benjamin, and took a sip of cinnamon tea. We had morning tea time like this quite often, but it felt as if we had not had it for a long time because last night was so eventful. The garden, which was even nicer than usual because of the guests, was as quiet as a library. It was as if a storm had passed through. I think I will need to feign sickness from a couple days out whenever there is an event in the future. Benjamin nodded his head. I put a piece of apple in Demi's mouth as he sat on my lap and looked toward the notebook on the table. Benjamin made sure to never look at me, not even with an accidental glance, whenever I was writing something in the notebook. Maybe he thinks this is some kind of tragic memoir of a diplomatic hostage or something like that. He wasn't completely wrong. So I didn't say anything. The divine item that was stolen from the Temple of Vigilance. It is possible that it did not disappear, and that someone had used it. This was the first thing to figure out. This is all just a hypothesis from here, but moving with an idea in mind would be completely different to moving without any thought. I started to analyze all of the information Lady Sarnez told me in front of the carriage last night. The divine item at the temple that should have been used to save Christelle had been used up after fulfilling someone else's wish first. That led to Lady Sarnez having no choice but to use the blessing of the Blue Sea, which was used in the original story as a wedding gift for Christelle and Imperial Prince Cedric. It was such a powerful variable that it warped the story for the main character. There was only one external factor that could have done this in my opinion. It was me. Squee. Demi, don't climb on top of the table. I hugged Demi's black belly as he reached his paw toward the table. I then put a grape in his mouth. The red panda quickly calmed down. Jesse Venetian definitely died in the original. The next day, someone did something to revive him, leading to my possession of his body and the timeline regressing. I thought that this was some kind of natural phenomenon until now. Things like this frequently happen in web novels where the main character ends up possessing a character in the novel. No external power seemed to have done anything. and they just ended up in the book. The life after possession was more important than how the possession happened. I believed that I was in a similar situation until yesterday. The theft of the divine item at the temple was a bit concerning, but I had not thought much about it, especially after almost dying. But it did not end up being a simple theft. Someone made a wish to save me, and I ended up possessing this body as a result. The divine item that was stolen from the Temple of Vigilance. It is possible that it did not disappear and that someone used it up instead. Who made the wish? Do other divine items have the power to grant wishes as well? If this is the case, then who is the culprit? I was a bit curious about that, but I didn't think that much would change even if I knew. Even if the future Christelle made the wish after hearing the news about Prince Jess's death, the current Christelle would have no idea. I thought about Yunce as well, but that seemed even less likely. I have no idea what Yunce would have to do to make magic like this happen since she was not a part of the novel. In the end, there were only two important things for me to consider. Do other divine items have the power to grant wishes as well? A lot of people seem to know that the divine item at the temple would grant someone's request through a wish of blood, but that did not seem to be the case for the blessing of the Blue Sea. According to what I read in a book, it was just an extremely strong water attribute divine item. The fact that it saved Christelle was just the author forcing it to grant a wish in order to push the story forward, but I could not ignore this glimmer of hope. If other divine items could react to human desire and grant their wish, would they be able to fulfill my request to go back home? Even I could tell that it was probably too good to be true, but Vice Captain Elizabeth is headed this way, Your Highness. I snapped out of my thoughts. My notebook was full of underlines and circles. I raised my head to see Vice Captain Elizabeth energetically walking over with her short olive-colored hair fluttering in the wind. Gonal was with her as well. Good morning, Prince Jesse. Hello, Vice Captain Elizabeth. The Vice Captain of the Imperial Guard seemed quite refreshed after successfully completing a big event. I closed my notebook and put it in my pocket. Benjamin got up and offered her a seat while Gonal chatted with me. Her Eminence, Cardinal Boutier, said that she would personally contact the Duham March. She asked how 3 p.m. this afternoon would work for a meeting. That's fine with me. I'm surprised that Her Eminence is okay with it. Thank you, Gonal. Gonal also told me some more information about Demi, along with the fact that my personal tutoring with the Cardinal at 11 a.m. was rescheduled for the afternoon. I thought about skipping the lesson today because I slept in and had a lot to think about, but in the end, I came up with a response like this. Benjamin quickly took care of his and Gonal's empty cups before telling us to chat in peace, before he walked toward Juliet Palace with the boy. Thank you for coming all this way despite your busy schedule. You worked really hard last night. I personally poured some cinnamon tea for Vice Captain Elizabeth. She received the cup and smiled. Her gray eyes were sparkling while she looked at the desserts. Your Highness, I welcome your summons at any time. It gives me an official excuse to avoid my work. I worked myself to near death yesterday, so I am feeling very refreshed now that it is over. She took a sip of tea as she told me about everything that happened at the spring ball. Most of it was related to the nobles, especially ones who wouldn't listen to the Imperial Guards and would only listen when she, the future Count, showed up. It gave her no choice but to show up at every single incident. Now that I think about it, I heard that you were actually at the Strouder Palace for a bit, Your Highness. I was only on the balcony. It was because of this little guy. I said that as I pointed to Demi, who was starting to climb up my chest. Is he the same one from before? Yes, he is. I thought that he had left, but turns out he was still in the palace. Soon, he should be headed to the Duham March, where the other divine item is located. Screech, Demi quietly screeched. I gently patted his back as I opened and closed my mouth a few times in an attempt to say something. I had called for Vice Captain Elizabeth early in the morning because I had something to say, but it was not easy to actually ask her now that she was here. I wondered if it was okay to ask this question, but I also felt that I had a right to know. Please feel free to say whatever is on your mind, Your Highness. She must have noticed my hesitation as she started to speak first. I finally managed to say the thing that had been worrying me the most since last night. I recently saw a young boy in the Imperial Palace. He asked me to keep it a secret, but I don't think I can do that anymore. I see. She put the teacup up to her lips. He has black hair and his eyes are orange. He is about this tall. Cough, cough. Cough, cough, cough. Vice Captain Elizabeth started coughing after she choked on the tea. Demi got shocked by this and raised his tail. I quickly handed her a napkin and poured some water into the now empty cup. She took a while to calm down, but there were still tears in her eyes. Are you okay? Please, ahem, please continue. Ah, of course. That little boy and I have run into each other a few times. He says name is Cedric. Ha. Quote. She sighed and covered her mouth with the napkin. It really seemed as if there was something she was hiding. He looked quite a bit like Imperial Prince Cedric. I'm sure you would think that if you saw him as well, Vice Captain Elizabeth. I see. Have you already met him before? Vice Captain Elizabeth nodded her head with a stiff expression on her face. Do you know him? She nodded again. He seemed to wander through the Imperial Palace as he pleased. Is that kid part of the Imperial family as well? She hesitated for a moment before nodding her head. As expected, the Imperial Prince's best friend really did know everything. An image formed in my mind. I recalled how Yunce would call the Imperial Prince trash all the time. Less than I quit my job and ended up as a noble young lady in another world greater than was said to be loved by many people because it mixed together old cliches and new ideas. It seems more ridiculous than a novel concept no matter how many times I think about it, but I guess people would keep reading about a male lead like this because they were interested in his backstory. Does he have a place to stay? His Royal Highness is taking good care of him, right? I don't think I heard you properly, Your Highness. She was blankly staring at me. That kid would even hide in the Imperial Palace Confessional. I don't think that his educational environment is very good. I know that it is not my place to say this since I am not his family member nor his parent, but... Excuse me, Your Highness. I'm sorry. Vice Captain Elizabeth reached both hands out to cut me off. May I ask who you think that child is? Whatever mistake His Royal Highness may have made when he was younger is none of my business. I sternly responded. Cedric was born with divine power. He seemed to have learned how to use it as well. However, he claimed he is neither a priest nor a holy knight. He found it difficult to tell me his parents or how old he was. His tone was arrogant and his actions were elegant. That must mean that the person he learned from was the same way. Cedric, that shithead, he really needs to think about what he did to Christelle. He better regret that for the rest of his life. Erase your past, you little punk. Yunce's voice echoed like a siren in my mind. The past that she might have been talking about could be this kind of past. I just ache seeing a child in a similar situation as myself. I was a child born between royalty and a priest as well. I hope that you can take good care of him, Vice Captain Elizabeth. She bit down on her lips. It must be hard for her to maintain her expression as her face was completely red from the neck up. She seemed to be shaking a bit as well. Demi, a toothpick is too sharp to eat. Spit it out. Demi started causing some trouble at that point, so I could not observe Vice Captain Elizabeth any longer. I think I heard her mumbling something about telling the truth or karma, but I wasn't sure. Anyway, I organized my notebook and had a nagging question resolved thanks to Vice Captain Elizabeth. My morning tea times were always so helpful. Asterisk. Your Eminence, Prince Jesse has arrived. Come in. Every second and every minute seemed like an eternity yesterday, but time was moving quite quickly today. It was 2:40 p.m. so I left for the Cardinal's office and I was standing there right now, making sure that I looked okay. Cardinal Boutier's attendant, Natalie, told me that I looked fine. She then opened the door. Benjamin and Gonal, who were standing behind me, told me to not hurt myself, along with, Your Highness, don't roll on the ground too much today. They both quietly whispered that to me. I couldn't tell whether they were worried about me or mocking me. Hello, little prince. Did you rest well? Prince Jesse greets Her Noble Eminence, Madam Cardinal. I bowed and raised my head to see her eyes sparkling under her monocle as she pointed to a side of her office. I had an ominous feeling while looking at her bright smile. I slowly turned my head. Another guest had arrived before me. Hello, Prince Jesse Venetian. A woman smiled brightly and greeted me respectfully. It was the last pair of eyes I saw before closing the door of the Strouder Palace balcony. Her blue-gray eyes looked cold but clear. Her outfit was different from yesterday, but her pink hair was still tied up the same way. This is young lady Christelle de Sarnez and she will be learning with you starting today. The Cardinal was declaring that we would be working as a team today. This was not something that was not in our original tutoring syllabus. TWSB, Chapter 26. Curriculum for Pride and Prejudice, 2, Learn Together, I stupidly asked back. The situation was so sudden and shocking that I forgot that I didn't even greet Christelle properly. I tried so hard to not go to the spring ball, but I ended up dipping my foot over there anyways. I consoled myself that it was okay since it was just a short visit, but what is this tragedy of being in the same place as the main character the very next day? It was hard to accept. It is only temporary. We just requested that the Vatican send a holy knight to teach Christelle, so I decided to teach her temporarily until they look over my request, accept it, and dispatch someone to the Sarnez duchy. I sighed internally at Cardinal Boutier's response. Basically, this meant that the Cardinal and the Empress were accepting Christelle's desire to become a holy knight in order to repay her debt to the imperial family. I guess they couldn't let go of such a talented individual even if the engagement was terminated. I wanted to complain and say that these were supposed to be one-on-one lessons, and that I wanted a refund, but this was the Cardinal and not some after-school learning center. Someone as busy as her probably did not have time to train two students separately. I had enough justification to say that I would go on spring break while she teaches Christelle. I was at least relieved to hear that it was temporary. The Cardinal was a priestess and not a holy knight, so she should only be able to teach Christelle the basics and mainly theory. I understand. Please take good care of me, young lady Sarnez. I spoke extremely stiffly on purpose. I called her by her family name and didn't smile. Since things were going to be like this despite my wishes, I decided that I would make sure to earn some negative points while we learn together. Yes, thank you very much for yesterday. My mother wishes to invite you for a meal when you are free. Unfortunately, Christelle responded as if she had not received any damage from my cold demeanor. The yesterday she was talking about was how I listened to Lady Sarnez's confession on the balcony during the spring ball. Lady Sarnez seems like a good person, but I wouldn't be able to eat properly because of the pressure and fear at the knowledge of eating with the main character's mother. Thank you for the offer, but I believe that will be difficult. I mechanically responded back. I was so relieved that I could not leave the imperial palace because I was a diplomatic hostage. Take a seat. I will get you some tea. The Cardinal smiled gently and guided Christelle and I to the couch. She called her attendant, Natalie, while observing us with a warm gaze that made me even more frustrated. I thought that damn bastard of an imperial prince should be here instead of me. Is this your first time meeting each other? I debated on how to answer that question when Christelle started speaking first. No ma'am, I went to see Prince Jesse at the Imperial Temple Confessional. I asked him to accept my mother's confession. The confessional. What a fitting location for a holy knight. It looks like your future will be bright. The Cardinal's beige-colored eyes curled up. Christelle and I just blinked our eyes as we had no idea what she meant by that. Every temple confessional has a set amount of ether flowing through it at all times. It is there to calm the penitents and inspire faith in them. There is also no better place for a holy knight to refill their ether in an emergency. Christelle's eyes sparkled as she nodded her head. She talked about how it now made sense as to why she felt a bit more relaxed as soon as she walked in there. After hearing that, I couldn't help but think about someone else I had met in the confessional. To be more specific, a certain young child. What are you doing here? I am listening to confessions. I am a priest. HMPH, you're doing things you weren't even told to do. I felt as if one mystery had been resolved. That punk Cedric must have urgently hidden in the confessional the day we first met because he was lacking ether. He was suffering from the fever, chills, and dizziness because of ether depletion, and had no choice but to go inside because he could not get proper help. I started feeling uncomfortable after thinking about that child. Imperial Prince Cedric really seemed to be trash, as Yuns mentioned. Cedric claimed that he was neither a priest nor a holy knight, but if I had a son like him, I would have done whatever I could to partner him with a talented priest. I would also never let a kid, who doesn't even seem old enough for elementary school yet, roam around on his own at night. Neglect, abandonment, this really seemed to be child abuse. I felt stupid that I had not realized the severity of the environmental issues around that child earlier. Here is the daisy tea for Prince Jesse. Natalie put a warm cup of tea in front of me. I finally snapped out of my thoughts. I had no idea when she came in here, but the Cardinal's attendant was elegantly serving us our drinks. Thank you, Natalie. Go get some rest. Yes, Your Eminence. I suddenly became curious after seeing how warmly the Cardinal was speaking to her attendant. Actually, I had planned on asking about it before I knew Christelle was going to be here today. The thing she had said when she had accepted me as her disciple. There is a young child. A young child. Yes. I hope that you can help that child. I wanted to ask her if Cedric was the child she was talking about. I wanted to ask if her response was regarding ether depletion when I asked if the child was sick. My theory seemed pretty accurate if Cedric really was the Imperial Prince's illegitimate child. Cedric would be like a grandson to the Cardinal since she was the Imperial Prince's godmother. It made sense that she would reach out to me since she was not the type of person who would sit back and let a child like that suffer. The thing I was curious about though, a holy knight usually partners up with a priest. They become friends who can watch each other's backs. The priest provides ether for the holy knight while the holy knight protects the priest to accept the will of the Almighty God. I wanted to know why that child still did not have a priest partner. I wanted to know why she had not attached a priest to a kid who was born into the imperial family of the empire and could come and go as he pleases in the imperial palace. Even if he was an illegitimate child that people didn't know about, I felt that she should get a reliable religious figure to come, even if it wasn't someone at the archbishop level or higher. I see, that is an interesting relationship. Christelle responded to the Cardinal with an interested expression on her face. I looked at the daisies floating in my teacup as I continued to think. Did Cedric not want a priest? That was something to consider as well. I was sure that it was child abuse until a moment ago, but all I could do was tell him to be careful if he was acting as he pleased. There was not much that the adults could do for him if he was sneaking out of his place to roam around at night and refusing to get a priest. But at least it seemed that the father and son did chat with each other as he seems to have shared with the Imperial Prince that I like food. I will have no reason to see you again starting tomorrow if the divine beasts detect the divine item in the Lord's castle. The child's clear voice echoed in my head. I really had not seen him since then. I did get reunited with Demi, but I'm sure that Cedric led the other two little creatures properly. There is no need for me to worry about the little punk since Vice Captain Elizabeth seems to know about the situation as well. Little Prince. I suddenly heard the Cardinal's voice. I jerked my head up in shock. I'm surprised that you are having idle thoughts with two ladies in front of you. She mischievously curled her eyes up. Both of their cups were about half empty. My apologies, Your Eminence. I guess last night was very tiring. I blanked out for a moment. I wet my lips with cold water and said whatever came to my mind. I should have been more careful not to think about other things while next to the main character. Christelle looked toward me and silently chuckled. I was asking if you had a partner, Your Highness. A partner? Yes, a holy knight partner. I do not have one. Her eyes opened wide at my response. Her pink hair, that was tied in a high ponytail, was shaking. I am new to this, but even I can feel that your ether is amazing, Your Highness. I can't believe that you still don't have a partner. Are holy knights more reserved? She quietly whispered. The Cardinal and I made eye contact. It was because my ether was not innate. The holy knights of the Holy Kingdom just did not want to partner with the Prince Jesse of the past who had nothing to offer. I was just a bishop in name, until I came here, and both the Prince Consort of the Holy Kingdom and the Empire's Empress believed that was the case as well. The former even sent weak assassins to kill me. But my ether level exploded exponentially at some point, and the Prince Consort's attempts ended up in failure. I had no idea about the source of this sudden power at first, but I have a hypothesis about it now. First of all, I am a foreigner who is unable to exit the palace as I please. The holy knight who partners with me will be inconvenienced in many ways. I came up with an excuse that sounded plausible in my current situation. Christelle nodded her head with a serious expression on her face. I didn't know whether my intentions of letting her know my situation got through to her or not. She is the precious daughter of a hotshot duke, while I am a diplomatic hostage whom the Holy Kingdom has no problem sending off. She would be happier with a different priest. But this is no longer the warring era, so there is no need for ether to always be full and for priests and their holy knights to always be around each other. She responded to me very quickly. It sounded as if my statement went in one ear and out the other. There are always fewer holy knights than priests. It is not weird for a priest to not have a partner. Cardinal Boutier smoothly interjected into our conversation. Our little prince is definitely a talented bishop, but it might be difficult for him to be a priest for a holy knight as he is dedicated to his task of taking confessions. Is she helping me? She's definitely trying to help me, right? Then should we invite a mage for the next lesson to learn the differences between a holy knight and a mage? Christelle was about to say something when the cardinal announced the end of the lesson. I got up with a confused expression on my face, unable to figure out what had just happened. Only 30 minutes had passed when I looked up at the clock. Thank you very much, Your Eminence. I will see you in 2 days. Well, I guess the orientation is always short. That was what I decided to think before respectfully saying farewell to the cardinal, giving a brief goodbye to Christelle, and quickly leaving her office. I rushed, because although it was not very likely, I didn't want to think about her potentially asking to walk together. Thankfully, the cardinal did not ask to have lunch today. I don't know whether I was being overly sensitive, but my back felt itchy until the moment the door closed. I would head over to Juliet Palace immediately and tell him if I were you. The vice captain of the Imperial Guard, who was sitting down in a corner of the indoor training ground, shouted in a loud voice. The Imperial Prince, who was drawing something with the tip of his sword, suddenly stopped moving. Really, I won't tell him the truth, but I would rather tell the truth and get his help than have such a misunderstanding. That would be 100 times better. Elizabeth seemed quite weird today. She was laughing instead of getting angry, despite the Imperial Prince's fire charring her sleeves black and the Imperial Prince breaking her training sword once again. She had been weird since the moment she got to the training ground. She would snicker to herself like a crazy person and go, "Ah, how can he have such a thought? Is he a genius?" At times, she seemed as if she would cry as well. Her expressions quickly changed back and forth from amazement to dying from laughter. Cedric slightly frowned. "I told you that I have no need for help from the prince." Elizabeth plopped down on the ground. The Imperial Prince wondered if he needed to call the Imperial doctor. It was concerning that his one friend was already suffering from the heat. His attendant, David Capison, happened to walk in through the door at that moment. Cedric lowered his sword and greeted him. "Your Royal Highness. I'm glad you are here. This is a message from Her Eminence, Cardinal Boutier." Quote. Capison continued to speak with a serious expression on his face. The wave entering the cold palace. 11 a.m. 2 days later in the outdoor training ground. That is the message. The Imperial Prince did not say anything. Elizabeth was the first to react. "Can I come watch?" Cedric just ignored her. He picked up his sword and headed toward the center of the training ground. Capison watched the Imperial Prince's back for a moment before giving a short nod to Elizabeth and heading out. The attendant just hoped that his master would make a wise decision. TWSB. Chapter 27. Curriculum for Pride and Prejudice. 3. Today was once again a day without a lesson. However, it was a day with an extremely important task for me to complete. "Hello, Prince Jesse. Have you been well, Your Highness?" "Hello, Agnes. It has been a while." I smiled brightly at the mountain keeper, Agnes, whom I had not seen in a while. Agnes lowered her strong body to bow deeply. This woman, who had come to confess to me last time because she felt burdened at the thought that she may have harassed a divine beast, seemed much calmer and relaxed than last time. "Please say hello to this guy as well. I have chosen to name him Demi." Hi, Screech. Agnes seemed to be having difficulties accepting the situation but gently waved her hand toward Demi, who was seated on top of my right shoulder. Seeing this, Demi slowly moved over to my left shoulder. The way he was raising and lowering his head to observe Agnes made me unsure as to whether he remembered her or not. "He's really going to a good place now, so you can be at ease." I told her that so that she could relax. Agnes nodded her head with tears in her eyes. I had invited Agnes here thinking that seeing Demi off might help Agnes feel more at ease, and I was relieved that my hypothesis was correct. "Your Highness, they are ready to head out." Benjamin came over to inform me. There was a large and luxurious carriage in front of Juliet Palace today. The Duham March had sent it to us to transport Demi, our divine beast, and the Marquise's extremely flashy family crest was next to the door to scare off anybody who would dare to get in its way. I walked toward the carriage with Agnes. Demi must not have realized the situation yet, as he was leisurely wagging his tail to match my steps. "You'll get in trouble if you cause a ruckus over there. Don't bite sharp things and don't fool around where people are working." I slowly explained things to the red panda. I couldn't tell if this little punk was actually listening to me, as he was busy biting the piece of fig I put in his mouth. I could hear the sound of the pulp breaking apart. I was confused where all the fruit he ate went, as he did not have to go to the restroom even though he ate so well. "Hello, Prince Jesse Venetian. I greet the moon of the Holy Kingdom." I turned my head after hearing an unfamiliar man's voice. The person who called out to me was a handsome buff man with black skin. He was wearing a uniform similar to Vice Captain Elizabeth's, but the decorations were more colorful and he had a lot of medals. I finally realized the identity of this unfamiliar man. It would be strange if he did not accompany this carriage on such an important day. "You must be Captain Hervé Duham. Nice to meet you. It is an honor to meet you like this, Your Highness. I've heard a lot about you from Elizabeth, ha ha ha." The man laughed out loud and offered me his hand. It was interesting, as this was the first time I was offered a handshake since coming to this world. I grabbed his large and thick hand as I greeted him. Captain Hervé Duham, the second son of the Duham March, looked less authoritative and more like a muscleman. He was one of the Empire's greatest mages and was featured in the less than bi-weekly Register greater than earlier in the year as one of the top 10 most charming bachelors in Register. Of course, I am not interested in that ranking at all. "Will you be escorting the carriage, Captain Duham?" "TL. Should be Sir Duham, but I am going to use Captain as I have been using Vice Captain instead of Dame for Elizabeth, as this word is used for multiple things in this novel." "No, Your Highness. I will only guard it until we reach the boundary of the Imperial capital. The Imperial troops and 3 clergy-level priests will escort it to the territory. The divine beasts are important, but Her Majesty's safety is most important to me." "I see." I nodded my head at him before stopping after realizing something odd. "I believe you just said divine beasts." "Yes, Your Highness." "The other 2 are in the carriage." "The other 2. My eyes opened wide while Benjamin and Gonal gasped behind me. The captain of the Imperial Guard looked at the 3 of us with confusion before opening the carriage door. The 3 priests sitting inside noticed me and jumped up to show their respect. Squeak. Squeal. I responded to their greeting while being stunned, looking at the 2 red pandas that seemed to be rolling on the floor trying to come closer to me. They were definitely bigger than Demi, and they did not have the white stripe on their tails like Demi had. They were exactly as Cedric had described them. "His Royal Highness brought them to us this morning. Your ether must really be amazing for the 3 of them to all reside only around Juliet Palace, Your Highness." Captain Duham laughed as he said that. Even Agnes, who had been quietly standing there, confirmed the situation by saying, "Yes, these are the 3 I saw in the mountain." My mind was a complicated mess as I turned toward Romero Palace. Cedric and the divine beasts had not appeared since leaving my balcony that night. I had expected the kid to have led them to the march, however, I guess he must have used up his fire attribute power keeping the divine beasts asleep at the Imperial Palace. That would have required a lot more ether than usual, screeched Demi screeched before climbing down my right arm. I was careful to make sure he did not fall, and reached my arm out and into the carriage. "It's a family reunion. You must be happy, Demi." Prue. The little punk safely boarded the carriage. The 3 red pandas sniffed each other and opened their mouths wide as if they were greeting one another. He then stood on his hind legs and put his body like a blanket on top of one of the other red pandas' heads. The 3rd red panda screeched before putting its black front paw on the 2 red pandas in a pile. The 3 of them ended up in one giant ball as they rolled around on the carriage floor. The priests groaned in pain as the 3 rolled around. "Your Highness, my heart is hurting so much." "That's normal, Gonal. It was cute enough seeing one red panda, but the 3 of them together was just too darn cute." I quietly observed the red pandas as they had fun together before handing 2 packages to one of the priests. I had asked Benjamin and Gonal for them last night. "This is some fruit, please give them to the divine beasts on your way there. I don't know about the others, but that one over there with the white stripe on his tail likes them a lot. This one here is snacks for all of you." The priests in the carriage became shocked and bowed deeply toward me. I felt embarrassed and waved them off. I had originally thought about a snack for Demi before remembering the people and preparing snacks for them as well last minute. Their reactions were more intense than I had expected. Elizabeth told me the desserts from Juliet Palace are amazing. Our priests are very lucky today. Captain Duham, who had been watching, laughed loudly before grabbing the carriage door. It was time to say goodbye. Demi, you have to stay healthy when you go there, okay? I waved my hand toward him. I've gotten attached to him already, and the thought of this being our last moment together made the tip of my nose scrunch up. But this guy had a better environment and a family to go back to. Demi must have noticed the change in the mood as he stopped rolling around and looked right at me. I did my best to smile and lowered my arm once the door was about halfway closed. It was at that moment, screech. Demi screeched loudly and swiftly escaped the closing carriage. I caught the black ball of fluff on my leg in shock. I was extremely confused, as I had never seen this little guy move so quickly. No, you have to go with your friends. Prue, why are you acting like this? Benjamin, Gunnar, Agnes, and Captain Duham all seemed anxious as well. I put on an awkward smile before looking at Demi, who had instantly conquered the top of my shoulder. Anybody would be able to tell that this divine beast looked upset. Its white eyebrows, that looked as if someone had dabbed paint on his face, were frowning viciously. I could see a pink tongue as Demi opened his mouth wide as if to threaten us. My heart hurt so much, it felt as if it would break. Demi, Captain Duham's hometown has a fire attribute divine item. I'm sure you'll like it. I slowly petted the little punk from head to toe and cautiously picked up his warm body. I was planning on putting him back in the carriage. Screech. Demi twisted his body and gently landed on the ground. I thought that I had failed, but he did not run away and simply grew vines with sharp leaves from the tips of his paws. I looked closely and the vines had thorns on them as well. His face was pout-pout while the plants were poke-poke. Maybe, do you not want to go? That seems to be the case, Your Highness. Captain Duham sounded amused. The priests inside the carriage looked completely stunned. I was a bit shocked but also touched as I stood there at a loss for words. Demi then raised his tail. Crack. Say that you will raise him, Your Highness. Gunnar became distraught looking at the now cracked ground. Demi was jumping up and down. It was almost as if he was asking whether or not I am aware of his abilities and to hurry up and receive him, this powerful glorious creature, and serve to his needs. And then, dunk. There was a dull noise as a small sinkhole appeared in front of Juliet Palace. It was the perfect size for Demi to go inside and take a nap in. I could hear Benjamin mumbling as he called out to the Almighty God. I thought about the possibility of someone getting hurt from Demi's protest and quickly lowered myself in front of him. Demi, big bro was in the wrong. I won't send you off. Screech. I mean it. I promise. Now I won't send you even if you ask me to let you go. Whimper. Demi shook his head. He still seemed disgruntled about something. One of the priests inside the carriage quickly delivered the bag of fruit to me. It was some very quick thinking on his part. Thank you very much. Oh look, here are some blueberries. I grabbed a handful of the blue fruit and handed it to him. He pointed his nose and sniffed the fruit before finally climbing my arm. He didn't seem to have any desire to eat it right now, but I guess he wanted me to show that I was willing to be his fruit shuttle. I could see the thorny vines on the ground slowly start to wither. His tantrum sure was odd. Captain Duham, it seems. I will need to keep Demi here. Ha ha ha. Yes, Your Highness. I will personally inform Her Majesty. I got to watch quite a precious sight today. The captain of the Imperial Guard was laughing out loud for some reason. I stood up looking embarrassed. I could see that the attendants from Juliet and Romero Palace had gathered around the carriage. It's like a free show for the neighborhood. Then let's say goodbye to your friends. Say bye-bye. Prue. Squee. Squee. Demi looked at the red pandas inside the carriage and let out a short purr, and the others responded similarly. The great clearance of demonic beasts is happening soon, so the three of them may be reunited at that time. Captain Duham slowly spoke as he watched. The coachman must have realized that the incident was over, as he stopped standing around and walked over to close the carriage door. The Imperial Guard members who had been standing at attention walked over after hearing Captain Duham's comments. Is the great clearance of demonic beasts the competition taking place next month? Yes, Your Highness. My big brother is sharpening his magic skills, waiting in anticipation. The captain of the Imperial Guard answered my question in a refreshing manner before getting on his horse. The Great Clearance of Demonic Beasts was a competition for hunting demonic beasts that happened at the start of spring in the Duham March. This event was famous because Marquis Francois Duham, Captain Duham's big brother and the organizer for the event, always put up an amazing prize for the winner, and because the Empress and the Cardinal observed the competition every year. The Empress participated 2 years ago and took the perks of the victor according to the less than bi-weekly register greater than. I'm sure Demi will enjoy that. I felt that Her Majesty might let Demi go with them to get some fresh air for an event like that. There shouldn't be any concerns of Demi running astray as Cardinal Boutier can use divine power. I nodded my head before thinking of a question and looking up. Captain Duham, are you perhaps coming to my lesson tomorrow? When you say lesson, Her Eminence the Cardinal said that she would invite a mage to teach me. I completely left out the part about Christelle, but it wasn't a lie. Captain Duham shrugged his shoulders and laughed. I'm not sure, Your Highness. I have never received such a request. But I have a pretty good idea who it will be if Her Eminence is calling a mage. He then added on how the title of the Empire's strongest mage was not his alone. He definitely seemed to be Vice Captain Elizabeth's superior, acting humble like this. I chuckled and took a few steps back. Please be careful, and please take good care of the divine beasts as well. He put his index and middle finger to his forehead to respond. Captain Duham shouted a few things before the carriage and the Imperial Guard members' horses slowly started to move. Agnes took a handkerchief out of her pocket and waved it in the air. We quietly stood there until the divine beasts and the Imperial Guard were no longer visible. Squeal. Demi said goodbye to his friends while in my arms. I had a quick thought about how the three of them might be siblings. TWSB. Chapter 28. Curriculum for Pride and Prejudice. 4. Hello, Prince Jesse Venetian. Hello, young lady Sarnez. Christelle was as respectful as usual while I was as cold as before. This is my first time doing a lesson outdoors. It sounds fun, doesn't it? Cardinal Boutier smiled warmly. My stiff face loosened a bit to show my agreement. I didn't mind doing the lessons indoors as I mainly stayed home anyway, but being outside was also nice as it felt as if I was going on my morning walk. It was also my first time in the outdoor training ground. It seemed even more fresh because I had not even glanced at this direction since seeing the Imperial Prince swinging his sword here on the first day I possessed this body. Parts of the ground were slashed with sword aura, and there were a lot of training swords to one side. I didn't know whether or not these were traces of the Imperial Prince. Good luck, Your Highness. Screech. Gunnel, be quiet. Something else that was different from usual was the audience at our lesson. I don't know what she was thinking, but the Cardinal allowed our close attendants to watch. Soganile and Benjamin sat in the shade and watched our lesson with Demi in a flower cart. The Cardinal's attendant, Natalie, was also next to them. Christelle's ability hasn't been publicly announced yet, but I guess they are planning on announcing it soon if people are allowed to watch her. I waved at the group of 3 people and the one divine beast. Our mage has yet to arrive. The Cardinal said that as if it was nothing. She then gently motioned toward Christelle. Will you try using your ability? We are outside and this side has a forest, so you can use your ability as freely as you would like. Christelle's water-colored eyes sparkled as she energetically nodded her head. Her tightly pulled up pink hair seemed to show her resolve. I took a few steps back. Splash, splash. A small drop of water appeared on top of her palm. I could hear Gunnel going, wow. Christelle smiled and moved her fingers as if she was creating a wave. The drop of water started to grow in size. The transparent blob of water became as big as a bowling ball before growing in size again to that of a sink. How is the ether consumption? It doesn't feel like a lot is being used. Christelle responded to the Cardinal's question. I've never made it this big even at home. It feels nice. The MC sounded refreshed. She seemed extremely satisfied with her ability. Watching her like this made me wonder about her motivation. I was pushing forward with the single goal of getting back home safely, but her goal seemed to be different. The fact that she claimed she would use this power to serve the Empire meant that she would walk in the middle of the spotlight. I thought hard about Chris's personality, as Yuns had mentioned to me. Aside from maintaining an indifferent attitude with the MC, it was important to remember her action patterns. Splash, wow. Gonal gasped loudly as Christelle's large water blob changed into a stream of water. The stream drew a circle in the air and spun around before squirming like a snake. Christelle must have enjoyed the feeling of controlling water with her fingertips as she laughed as well. As she suddenly reached her arm out, chh. The strand of water that was as wide as a brook quickly shot out toward the opposite side of the training ground. Everybody focused their attention on the rapidly moving water. I felt like a spectator chasing the ball with my eyes while watching soccer. At that moment, Shaw. Someone's sword sliced through the water. I gasped at this unbelievable sight. To be more specific, someone's sword aura had cut through the water, but it looked as if he sliced through water with a sword. The scattered water drops sparkled like glass in the sunlight. They looked as if they were moving in slow motion. Your Eminence. I heard a familiar low voice. The man who appeared was surrounded by scattered beads of water similar to a camera filter that looked like a fan art Yunce once showed me. Water was dripping down from the sword in his left hand. A middle-aged man, who seemed to be his attendant, and Vice Captain Elisabeth were behind the young man. She seemed excited for some reason as she greeted me with her eyes over Cedric's shoulder. Welcome, Cedric. You made it right on time. The Cardinal smiled warmly while looking at the Imperial Prince. It's not that I didn't expect this, but it wasn't like I hoped this bastard would show up. My poor life. This is my godson who will help us out as a mage today. The Cardinal proudly introduced the Imperial Prince. The Imperial Prince bastard was simply looking at us with his condescending orange eyes. Demi, who was in the shade, quietly squealed. He must think the Imperial Prince seems shitty too. The Imperial Prince had introduced himself as a magic swordsman at the ball. That meant that he was both a mage and a swordsman, which was why it made sense for this bastard to show up today. I wondered if the reason Captain Duham said he was one of the Empire's greatest mages was because of the Imperial Prince as well. He seemed to be talented in all aspects as the main male lead. He was good with the sword, with magic, and he has a son. He would be the MC's all-rounder helper if he knew how to use ether. Then we will await you in the shade over there, Your Royal Highness. Vice Captain Elisabeth quickly walked over toward Gonal. She must have brought snacks with her because she smelled savory like popcorn. The Imperial Prince's attendant followed behind her. Anyway, the situation wasn't all bad for me. It would be best if I wasn't here, but it was still good for these two to have a reason to interact with each other again now that their engagement has been broken. The overall big picture of the Romfan seemed to be intact despite the beginning being twisted. The Imperial Prince and Christelle stared into each other's eyes for a long time, as if to reinforce my ideas. Yes, the all-rounder helper can be her boyfriend too. Your loyal subject greets our Royal Highness. However, the damn Imperial Prince didn't even open his mouth at Christelle's greeting. I could see the MC frowning at this classless, rotten bastard. I clicked my tongue internally. I guess I was supposed to completely ignore her. That's kind of hard for me. Hello, Your Royal Highness. It looks like you meddle in everything. I greeted him thinking that he would ignore me too, but the bastard immediately responded. How old is this punk? Why does he keep speaking informally to me? His tone would be problematic even if he was older than me. Please don't distort the truth. The two of you are participating in my lesson. I countered as Christelle looked up at me while the Imperial Prince looked down at me. I debated whether I should have been so sassy back to him. I should be like a fly on the wall around the two of them. How about we end the greetings here and get started? Christelle and Cedric, head over to the center. The Cardinal was my savior. I turned around without hesitation after hearing her voice. I joined the now 5-member audience while Benjamin complimented me on my hard work and gave me a rose tea with frozen rose petals. It felt as if we were on a picnic. Please accept my greeting, esteemed Prince Jesse Venetian. My name is David Capison, and I am His Royal Highness, Imperial Prince Cedric's chief attendant. The attendant, who came with the Imperial Prince, gracefully greeted me. It was my first time meeting him, but I could tell immediately that he was a respectful person unlike the Imperial Prince. Hello David. Nice to meet you. I smiled and greeted him back before motioning to Vice Captain Elisabeth with my eyes. She quickly understood and moved a few steps away. I confirmed that nobody was eavesdropping before quietly asking Vice Captain Elisabeth a question. How is Ceddy doing? Vice Captain Elisabeth's face turned odd at my question. She furrowed her brows and pursed her lips to reflect the complicated thoughts on her mind. He is very well. He is, in fact, too healthy. Really. I think that the two divine beasts were sealed at the Imperial Palace until yesterday. The impact on that little kid should have been rather big if he used that much ether. He took care of his body well, so he is okay now. He was drinking good tea too. That's a relief. Was it dandelion tea? Bong. Sha. There were loud explosions going off. The audience and I all turned toward the center of the training ground. A pillar of water as thick as the Imperial Prince's body was unable to push forward while being hindered by the training swords stabbed into the ground. I couldn't help but drop my jaw in shock. I could hear the Cardinal's voice from a distance. The difference between mages and holy knights is simple. People who use special ether with attributes like water, fire, air, or earth become holy knights, while people who use powers aside from those become mages. For example, Cedric's mana. The Imperial Prince held his sword in his left hand as he raised his right hand. It reacts to metal. Clong. He drew a horizontal line with his fingertip, and the rest of the swords being stored to the side started flying toward Christelle. The audience jumped up in shock. However, the MC was no pushover. Chh. Clang, clang. A wall of water shot up, not from her hand this time but from the floor, to parry all the swords away. The water shot up so quickly that white sprays of froth splashed out to the sides. She smiled and clenched her right fist. The water barrier instantly turned into a round sphere. She was adapting so well. You're going so hard against a beginner. Christelle grumbled at the Imperial Prince as she opened her hand. A large orb of water blasted its way toward the Imperial Prince. The Imperial Prince didn't move to dodge and simply fixed his grip on his sword as he slashed through the air without any hesitation. Shish. Bong. A beautiful sword aura crashed into the water. The heat gathered at the tip of his sword made the orb of water evaporate into fog. The air in the training ground trembled. Once it seemed as if things were over. Sha. Papa-pow. Long water nails stabbed toward the Imperial Prince's back as more training swords flew over to stop them. He had not even turned around to look. Water splashed everywhere, leaving the Imperial Prince's sleeves and hair wet. A holy knight who attacks from behind. Even the attack team would sneer at you. He snorted. Christelle's gaze turned cold. The Cardinal was mediating the situation. The two of them seemed good for each other. I quietly commented while watching them. There was definitely something different about the main couple. I had that same thought while watching them dance at the ball, but I became sure of it after seeing them working out together in the middle of the day like this. Black hair as dark as night and bright pink hair. Orange eyes that seemed to be burning and cold blue-gray eyes. The contrast between the two of them seemed to be a sort of cruel arrangement set by the author. Both of them have very belligerent personalities, so they should be able to communicate well if they become close. What is it? The others who were watching were looking at me as if they had seen a ghost. Your Highness, that's a bit squee. Gonal sounded as if he heard something extremely uncomfortable. I was headed toward the flower cart because Demi seemed uncomfortable as well when I noticed an attendant approaching from a distance. She was walking briskly, almost to the point of running, so it seemed quite urgent. She noticed that we were all gathered at one table and bowed to us with a shocked expression. What's going on? Natalie asked first, which made me think that this woman was likely one of the Cardinal's attendants. Marquis Francois Duham just announced the prize for the winner of the Great Clearance of Demonic Beasts. Huh. Is that such an urgent matter? Wow, what is it? Vice Captain Elizabeth's eyes glowed while saying that she wanted to participate this year as well. However, the others seemed to be having similar thoughts to me as they looked a bit tense. The Imperial Prince would have to protect the palace alone while the Empress and the Cardinal head for the Duham March for the Great Clearance of Demonic Beasts. As a diplomatic hostage, I would also be stuck here. The demonic beast hunting competition had nothing to do with us. The divine item. He said that he is putting the Sword of Wisdom from the Flaming Star on the line as the prize. Her Majesty is urgently looking for Her Eminence regarding this matter. Excuse me. Vice Captain Elizabeth, Gonal, and I shouted at the same time. Benjamin, Natalie, and David were pale in the face. All of us turned toward the center of the training ground at the same time. The three people there must have felt our gazes as they turned around to face us as well. All that I managed to see in that moment was Imperial Prince Cedric's now broken sword, look at this bastard's attitude problem. He broke another sword. TWSB. Chapter 29. The last and only one. After that, well, it was quite a mess. My goodness, Francois. Cardinal Boutier had a rare baffled look on her face after hearing that Marquis Francois Duham put the divine item, the sword of wisdom from the flaming star, as the winning prize for the great clearance of demonic beasts. She then stopped our lesson abruptly, and quickly left the training ground to meet with the Empress. The Imperial Prince also left without saying goodbye with a serious look on his face. I used the dampened mood to my advantage, and quickly returned to Juliet Palace. I gave a short goodbye to Christelle as I left and she looked as if she was thinking about something again. It was a lot for me, even though I had transmigrated here almost a month ago, so imagine how shocked the people who were born and raised here were feeling. Who in their right mind would offer a divine item as a prize for a competition when using a divine item for personal use is believed to be a grave sin? Marquis Francois Duham, he is someone who would do something like that. Benjamin started speaking in a calm voice. This was our first balcony tea time in a long time. I petted Demi's tail as I waited for his explanation. The Marquis is someone who puts everything into finding an interesting prize that will be discussed by the masses every year. He is also the person who turned the great clearance of demonic beasts into one of the Empyrean events. He even turned his territory into a tourist attraction to fill his residents' stomachs. He probably thought that there was no reason he couldn't use the divine item after learning that the blessing of the Blue Sea was gone. Someone like Marquis Duham would have heard the details about how the blessing of the Blue Sea had disappeared. The Cardinal had personally contacted him so that he could take care of the red pandas. It would have been difficult to give him another reason as to why they were sending the divine beasts to his territory when the Sarnez duchy was closer. There was no need to hide the truth from the Duham household, one of the Empress's close vassals, since they had decided to train Christelle as a holy knight. But still, isn't this a grave sin to use a divine item like this? It is definitely a big deal. Maybe he thought that it was okay since nobody would be able to take the sword of wisdom from the flaming star. Gonal, who had been quietly listening, offered his thoughts. I tilted my head in confusion. Demi also tilted his head. Why can't people take it? The sword of wisdom from the flaming star is embedded into the ground in the middle of the wilderness outside the Lord's castle. Nobody has succeeded in pulling it out. It is Excalibur. It is said that the sword of wisdom chose to embed itself there when the Almighty God bestowed the divine items onto the continent. There is a prophecy that only a chosen person will be able to pull it out and gain the power of fire. Isn't it a bit cliché to copy the legend of King Arthur? I had that thought as I put a small creme brulee in my mouth. The pairing of sweet, moist custard cream with thin, crunchy caramel on top was a masterpiece. It's so good. Numerous people have attempted to pull out the sword of wisdom. Tens of thousands of men and women of all ages, occupations, and identities entered the territory. It might have even been in the hundreds of thousands, but everybody failed. Gonal added on as well. I noticed that Benjamin and Gonal's plates were empty, so I put a creme brulee on each of their plates. Benjamin was silent for a moment before he pointed to a spot on the divine item map I had out on the table. A glowing pearlescent black thread was embroidered in the shape of a sword on the southern part of the imperial capital. There were luxurious red threads around it simulating flames. So he is putting it on the line for attention since nobody can take it anyway. Yes, Your Highness. That is exactly right. Marquis Duham really loves attention. Benjamin nodded his head with disappointment at the boy's mumbling. He is very understanding and wise, so he is popular with the residents of his territory, but the opinion of him is different in the beau monde. He is someone who would do anything within his power for attention. He is very loud. Of course, that aspect is currently helpful to Her Majesty. However, Benjamin's overall evaluation was that he was someone who seemed extremely frivolous, not meeting his position as a marquis. Basically, he's an attention seeker. I'm sure Her Majesty and Her Eminence will convince the Marquis. I'm certain they will. Even Marquis Duham cannot be allowed the precedent of using a divine item so rashly. I nodded my head and took a sip of chrysanthemum tea. It was interesting. If two divine items successfully transmigrated people into this world, was it possible that a third could as well? I would be lying if I said I had not thought about it. However, I probably ended up here to save Jesse Venetian from dying in the future war, so it was extremely likely that I would not be able to go back home until then. It's hard for me to get out of the imperial palace since I'm a diplomatic hostage. I guess it will be difficult for me to see the Sword of Wisdom. It is a fire attribute item, so it is not compatible with young lady Sarnez who wishes to be a holy knight. I mumbled to myself. Ether compatibility was pretty simple. Water was stronger than fire, fire was stronger than earth, and earth was stronger than water. Air isn't impacted much by the other attributes, but it also did not influence them a lot either. Furthermore, I read in Less Than Ether 101 become a holy knight in 6 weeks. Greater than that, holy knights needed to find weapons that match their attribute to be able to effectively use their abilities. Having a fire attribute weapon would make it difficult to use water attribute abilities, so there should be no reason for Christelle to want the Sword of Wisdom. Oh right, I heard that young lady Sarnez has met many bishops the last few days. I think she has also met 2 archbishops. Gonal suddenly brought up the topic of Christelle. The young boy was dutifully completing his penance of, "Bring me any news regarding young lady Sarnez and the imperial prince." Contacting high-ranking priests must mean that she is looking for a partner as a holy knight. The 2 of them agreed with my hypothesis. I put a piece of kiwi in Demi's mouth before quietly sighing. I couldn't tell, but everybody here has told me that my ether is amazing. That was why it was hard to ignore the possibility that Christelle will make me her partner. I was concerned about how the 2 of us might get entangled since this was a romantic fantasy story, but the wise Christelle seems to be weighing her options before choosing a partner. I could probably rag on her a bit by asking how many people she previously looked at before rejecting her. Screech. Yes, it's pretty. Thank you. Demi made an orange petrinia grow in his front paw and handed it to me. I wondered if he was interested in the chrysanthemum tea, so I poured some into his plate, but he seemed indifferent. Raising a divine beast as a companion was not easy. I'm sure that my brother is not just doing this for attention. Marquis Duham's younger brother, Hervé Duham, captain of the Imperial Guard, spoke in a serious voice. Empress Frederick was silent with a hand against her forehead. Aurélie Boutier was by her side as usual as she sat at the large office desk. The Cardinal had a picturesque smile on her face, but nothing could be read in her eyes underneath the monocle she was wearing. Of course, I cannot say that there was no intention of getting attention at all. However, I believe that all 3 of you are well aware of what my brother has proclaimed for a long time, Your Majesty. The Sword of Wisdom from the Flaming Star is a fire attribute divine item, and His Royal Highness was born with fire attribute ether, so, I was not born with it. The person who cut him off was the subject of the discussion, Cedric Riester. His orange eyes that were full of distant despair were glowing with a penetrating gaze. I was cursed. Your Royal Highness. I lose my physical body the moment I use even a bit of that power. How can you call that an ability? The captain of the Imperial Guard shut up. A suffocating silence passed through them. Houses Sarnez, Duham, and Maudet were the closest confidants of the imperial family who knew about the imperial prince's body condition. They had vowed loyalty to their deaths and had watched over the imperial prince for a long time. Hervé Duham knew that he should watch what he says because he knows of the imperial prince's situation, but he could not currently do so. The blessing of the Blue Sea had been absorbed into young lady Sarnez's body. The most plausible plan for the imperial prince had been turned to dust. Then there was only one decision left in his opinion. If you are not able to suppress your fire attribute ether with a water attribute divine item, what about using a fire attribute divine item to fill your ether instead? He finally mentioned the idea his family had. The imperial prince was looking at the black glove on his hand without saying anything. The cardinal quietly sighed. There was a crack in Cedric Riester's soul, his large plate. It was a minuscule crack that wouldn't have mattered if he was born as a regular person. However, he was born possessing fire attribute ether. That was the start of his tragedy. The imperial prince had fallen into a deep slumber after birth as a result of ether depletion. The people who had secretly shown up to take a look at the young imperial grandchild, the empire's noble mages and the Holy Kingdom's elderly cardinals, had said that it was a curse the Almighty God had placed on the empire. Even high-ranking priests pouring ether into his body until they fainted did not allow the imperial prince to stay awake for very long. It was as if they were pouring water into a jar with no bottom. He had to sleep 18 hours a day until he turned 12 years old. There were some miraculous changes after Prince Consort Alexandre's death, but even then, he was unable to maintain his physical body after he used even the tiniest sliver of his ether. This was the reason the imperial prince, who would be 25 years old after his birthday this year, had not ascended to the position of imperial crown prince. He would instantly turn into a young child as soon as the balance in his ether shifted. Your Royal Highness, I understand this may come off as disrespectful, but I must say it. Please enter the great clearance of demonic beasts and pull out the sword of wisdom from the flaming star as the winner. Imperial Prince Cedric snorted. Only the chosen one should be able to pull it out. It is because there had been no holy knights in the Empire until now. The divine item should react if you pour fire attribute ether into it. At least, that is what our family believes. And if nothing happens despite pouring ether into it? The young man's low voice sunk even lower. I would be unable to pull the sword out and turn into a child in front of the Empire's nobles. Do you have a plan for that situation as well, Captain Duham? Hervé Duham's head sank a bit. The one who spoke up was the Imperial Prince's godmother. There is someone who can make sure that does not happen. Orally, the Empress called out after understanding what the Cardinal meant. However, the Cardinal did not stop. That child is pure. He would not push your hand away. We cannot reveal a secret of the imperial family to the prince from a hostile nation. The Imperial Prince is right. The Empress answered almost in a sigh. Her cherry-colored eyes were full of anguish. Even if I was not the one who caused the war, the two nations have not been connected for 30 years as a result. The prince came not for an alliance but as a diplomatic hostage. We cannot give him our trust without thinking it through. However, it is true that the little punk has been cast out of the Holy Kingdom. It is also confirmed that his ether level is something even the Cardinal cannot fathom. That is why, she removed the hand that was supporting her forehead and pushed back her short silver hair. Cedric, do as you wish. The Imperial Prince's eyes opened wide. Frederick looked right at her son as she continued to speak. Decide whether or not you will trust the prince and get his help to obtain the Sword of Wisdom. If not, we will cut off one of the Marquise's legs when he gets to the imperial capital and make him take back the proclamation regarding the prize. Quote. I'm sure there are other means even if it is not the Sword of Wisdom. I promise to give you every opportunity in this world. Mother, you also don't have to worry about the prince betraying you. I will take care of it if something like that happens. There was no need for a sword master like her to personally step in. Prince Jesse would turn into a corpse overnight if it was the Empress's will. The Holy Kingdom would welcome it with open arms if that was what the imperial family wanted. The large office became completely silent, as if someone had poured cold water over them. Please give me some time to think about it. Cedric Ryester responded. Hervé Duham let out a deep sigh. TWSB. Chapter 30. The last and only 3 days passed and it was now Saturday. Cardinal Boutier cancelled one of our lessons. I didn't hear the reason behind it, but her attendant, Natalie, personally came to Juliet Palace to deliver the message. I believed she was dealing with the issue of the Sword of Wisdom from the Flaming Star being offered as the winner's prize for the great clearance of demonic beasts. It wasn't bad for me. We could make the lesson up at a later point, and the less contact I had with Christelle and the Imperial Prince, the better. You have nothing else on your daily agenda other than taking confessions in the afternoons, Your Highness. In addition, your monthly dignity maintenance allowance and salary have arrived, so I have placed them in the safe. I understand. Excuse me. My voice automatically went up after hearing about an allowance or salary for the first time since transmigrating into this body. I have money, dignity maintenance allowance and salary. Yes, Your Highness. I informed you about it the morning after you arrived. Benjamin responded respectfully while standing on the other side of the table. I tried my best to recall the events of the day after my transmigration. However, all I remembered was eating well during my meal, eating well during snack time, and burying my face in my notebook. My ears must have temporarily shut down from the shock of transmigrating for the first time in my life. How did I miss such important information? I frequently receive money. Yes, Your Highness. The imperial family deposits 1 million francs every month for your dignity maintenance allowance and another 1 million francs for being a priest working in the imperial palace. So, 2 million francs a month. Yes, sir. Francs were the currency of France. I thought that the French patch was only for the names of people in the empire, but the author must have simply made everything, including the currency, French. It made me wonder if the Venetian Holy Kingdom used euros. I am having a hard time getting a sense of how much 2 million francs are. I think the value of things might be different in the Holy Kingdom. Naturally, I asked the question in the most natural way I could. I wondered if it was the equivalent of about 2 million won. If the value of the currency in the novel is the same as the value of one in real life, the author could calculate things easier. All I do here is take confessions, study, eat, and play with Demi. I pay no security deposit. I pay no rent. The attendants take care of all my meals, all the cleaning, and all the laundry, so 2 million a month was like winning the lottery. With 2 million francs, you should be able to buy a luxurious residence on the outskirts of the imperial capital. It is unfortunately not enough for a place beside a lake. My mind blanked out at Gonal's response. What? If you build it yourself, you should be able to afford one near a lake as well, Your Highness. Benjamin must have thought that I was disappointed about being unable to get a house by a lake, as he quickly added on. I had no idea how to accept this. I wondered why they were giving a diplomatic hostage, who basically ate all their food, so much money. They also pay in advance, which meant that 4 million francs were currently sitting in my safe. But I had nowhere to spend it. It'd be one thing if I was planning on packing up my money and hiding in a remote territory or investing in something prior to the war to better my circumstances, but I was a hostage whose true goal was to go home. The Riester imperial family is quite wealthy. I could only gasp in amazement. Gonal laughed out loud. It is not an exaggeration that His Royal Highness is called the Empire's greatest heir. I nodded my head. I guess the main male lead of a romfan can't just be tall and have a pretty face. Ah, is it possible for me to send the money to someone else? Benjamin looked concerned at my question. I immediately realized what he must have mistakenly thought. Of course, I am not sending it to the Holy Kingdom. There is nobody there to receive it anyway. Then, I wish to send it to the House of Belang. Both Gonal and Benjamin's mouths shut. I recalled the twin assassins from the Holy Kingdom who had disguised themselves as attendants in an attempt to kill me. I sometimes woke up feeling frustrated whenever I thought about the poor Belang twins who were murdered for their attempt. I didn't even know their faces, but how could I sleep well at night knowing that they died at such a young age because of me? I know that the hearts of parents who lose their children cannot be consoled with money. But, the Belang twins were hired for me. I know it is late, but I wish to help cover the funeral costs if possible. Benjamin slowly nodded his head. It meant that he would proceed as I requested. Please send 3.5 million francs to the Baron couple. Gonal covered his mouth in shock. I smiled bitterly. The money was useless to me currently and I would get more next month anyways. I thought that it might be at least a little bit helpful to the Baron couple. That was enough for me. Demi silently walked over and rubbed his furry body against my ankle. How is it, Your Highness? We made it so that you could open the wooden window from your seat as you requested. It's perfect, Maxim. Thank you very much. I also told him he did a great job and the Imperial Palace's carpenter scratched the back of his head as he smiled with embarrassment. Maxim was the one who had made the priest is currently unavailable, and, now taking confessions plaques for me as well. He was friends with Agnes, who works in the rear mountain of Juliet Palace. It doesn't even make any noise when I open it. I spent a lot of effort on the hinges. Those small details are the difference between plain high-quality work and the highest quality work, Your Highness. He proudly explained. I continued to gasp in amazement at the confessional's wooden window that Maxim had completely fixed. This is why technical skills are so important. Maxim and the Imperial Palace's carpenters seem to have some downtime after the spring ball, as they have been in and out of the Imperial Palace temple for the last few days fixing the confessional. I made a slightly difficult request, hoping that the wooden window could be opened from the priest's side, and they just asked me to leave it to them as if it was nothing. They didn't even seem to question whether the priest should come face to face with the penitent. I was thankful for it. The reason I asked for such a design was for whenever Cedric showed up. 2 days ago, the carpenters had removed the broken wooden window. They were talking to each other about how it looked as if a knife had pierced through it and about why there would be a knife in here in the first place. I had a hard time keeping a poker face on because I felt guilty despite it not being me who did it. I made up my mind to teach that kid a lesson about property damage when I see him next. The decorative rope for summons is not in our jurisdiction, but the people in charge said that you will need to exchange the entire rope. I believe it will take some time, Your Highness. I understand. I awkwardly responded as I smiled. I didn't dare say that I had the cut-off part in my possession and that the rope would be like new if they just sewed it back on. Then, I would have to explain about the little guest who was with me as well. Then I will be on my way now, Your Highness. Please be healthy as well, esteemed divine beast. Squee. Maxim gathered his tools and put them in a leather bag as he bowed, making Demi quietly squeal while in my arms. I said goodbye to Maxim with Benjamin and Gonal before returning to the confessional. It was time to start my afternoon task of taking confessions. Demi, stay with the two of them for a bit. Whimper. I handed the red panda to Gonal, who was pretty good at holding the animal safely now, and received a full picnic basket from Benjamin. I watched as the group of 2 people and 1 divine beast walked into the priest's office before I closed the door of the confessional and put the priest is currently unavailable sign up. And then, screech, I entered the empty penitent's side. It was not my usual priest's seat, but the direct opposite side. Let's see, it was pretty dark inside so I could not see the edges of the wooden wall very well. I wished that I had my cell phone for the flashlight, but settled on releasing my circle. Golden ether poured out and drew a circle on the ground. I took a short breath in and the holy domain shrunk in size. It should be around here. I crouched on the ground and searched around the chair the penitents sat on. I didn't have a big goal today. My mind was light because it was just a curiosity that had no need to be resolved. I pressed down on the area right underneath the chair with my foot, but there didn't seem to be any secret openings. Knock knock. I knocked on it as well just to be sure, and it didn't sound hollow. So it is not below. Is it behind it? The confessional was built with large wooden planks against the wall, so it was impossible to sneak in through the sides. If the hidden passage wasn't from below, then it should be on the back wall. I pushed the chair slightly out of the way and pushed on the back wall. A scene from a spy movie I watched with Yuns flashed in front of my eyes. In the movie there was some kind of decoration you needed to twist or pull for a door to open, but there wasn't anything like that because this was a temp. Screech, I heard the confessional door open behind me. I clenched my teeth out of embarrassment. There's always someone like this who walks in despite the sign saying I am not available. What are you doing over here? It was a familiar voice. I slowly turned around. I remember getting this question from this kid the first time I met him as well. You are walking in like a normal person today. Cedric snorted at my question. His eyes were the same orange color as that damn Imperial Prince bastard. Excuse me. I continued sitting on the ground while putting my hand up to his small forehead to check on his condition. Thankfully, he didn't have a fever. He wasn't breathing heavily, nor did he have any cold sweats, so it didn't seem as if he overdid it with his ether. Cedric sat on the penitent's chair and quietly observed what I did without showing any reaction. Shouldn't you have a partner priest? Or do you already have one but you just avoid them? I didn't know who he took after to not answer any questions and be so frustrating. I had no choice but to start with easy questions if he didn't want to answer the hard questions. It was similar to dealing with a 6-year-old who won't answer why he fought against his friend but would answer if you asked what he ate for a snack. Did you walk in through the main door? How about you stop there since I used a path you don't know about? See, he answered right away. What about some food? I have some flanard. Do you want some? Did they starve you at the Holy Kingdom? I chuckled. I decided to increase the difficulty level of the questions. Did you tell your father before you came out? What? The boy frowned as if he heard something unbelievable. I lowered my voice and was about to ask in detail when I heard the heavy thud of the temple door opening. However, I did not hear any footsteps after that. It seemed as if someone opened the door and looked inside. Cedric squinted. It's okay, I put the plaque up saying I am not here. The boy scoffed at my comment. I did not mention the fact that my absence sign has been ignored twice already. I removed my holy domain so that it would not be visible from the outside before cautiously grabbing Cedric's elbow. The boy's eyes opened a bit wider as I changed the ether delivery method to physical touch. It seemed to be effective as I could feel my ether quickly leaving my body. I quietly started speaking again. Do you want to stop here for today? It's dangerous for you because other people can come in and out at that moment. Click. Eek. The door handle to the confessional turned. I grabbed onto the handle out of reflex. The fact that I basically lunged at the door seemed to have been worth the effort, as the door thankfully did not open. But I was sure that there was someone on the other side. My heart was beating wildly in shock. How? I quietly mumbled. I had not heard anything until just now. The temple door did open earlier, but I had not heard anything since. Shish. Cedric quietly whispered. The boy's lips clearly formed a word. Mage. Clunk. The guest outside turned.